There is a tension many of us feel but rarely name. We try to live by rules, by plans, by what is expected of us. Yet, beneath all of that, something aches. It is as if our life is in order on the surface, and still, somewhere deeper, a call will not be quiet. Rumi stands exactly in that tension between law and longing. He was a master of religious law, a scholar of subtle arguments. And yet, the centre of his world is not a rule, but a fire. He calls that fire Ishq, divine love. This love is not a passing emotion. For Rumi, it is the very fabric of existence. Every joy and every wound, every meeting and every loss are secret movements of this love. The universe is not a cold machine, but a love story in which we are already involved, though we have forgotten the plot. That forgetting is the pain we carry. Rumi hears it in the song of the reed flute cut from the reed bed. It cries for the place it once belonged. In that cry he recognizes the human soul, restless, thirsty, never quite at home. For him, this restlessness is not a defect to be fixed, but a compass quietly pointing us back toward our source. On this path, ideas are helpful, but they are not enough. Rumi honors knowledge, but he does not bow to it. Books and doctrines can guide, but they cannot perform the one thing needed, the transformation of the heart. True knowing is tasting an inner change, not just an outer explanation. He speaks of this change in two movements. Fana is the burning away of the separate self, pride, control, the masks we cling to. Baqa is what remains after the burning, a way of living rooted in God, more transparent, more real, less afraid. Again and again, his poetry walks this arc from tightness to release, from confusion to a clear, quiet intimacy with the divine. Running through all of this is a daring vision often called the unity of being. The distance between creator and creation grows thin. Everything becomes a reflection of the one as countless waves rise and fall on a single ocean. The many do not disappear, but they are seen differently. Each moment becomes a mirror in which the beloved might appear. In this journey with Rumi, we will not only study his words, we will listen for the reed's music in our own chest. We will explore what it means if our longing is not a mistake, but a message. And we will sit with the possibility that, as Rumi suggests, the path back to the one is not a road we travel to somewhere else, but a remembering of a closeness that has never truly been lost. Part 1. The Song of the Reed, the Metaphysics of Separation. Listen again to the very first sound of Rumi's great work, the Masnavi. Not an argument, not a definition, a cry. Listen to the reed, he says. How it tells a tale, complaining of separations. Before he speaks of God, before he speaks of law, he asks us to listen to an instrument that is, above all, wounded. A hollow reed, cut from its bed, turned into a flute. Its song is nothing but breath passing through emptiness. For Rumi, this is where philosophy truly begins. Not in a library, in the sound of something that remembers where it once belonged. He looks at the reed and sees the human soul, once rooted in a vast, living marsh of presence, now cut off, dried, and shaped into a narrow tube. And yet, precisely because it has been emptied and cut, it can sing. The reed's music is the metaphysics of separation put into sound. We often think of separation as a concept. Rumi treats it as an ache. He wants us to notice that whatever we call loneliness, restlessness, or vague dissatisfaction is not simply a psychological problem. It is a clue, a subtle pressure from the depths of our being, insisting that this world of routines and roles is not the whole story. In the reed's cry, Rumi hears the soul saying, "I come from somewhere else. I was made for more than this." He does not rush to soothe that cry. He does not tell the reed, or us, to get over it, to be more grateful, more adjusted, more productive. Instead, he turns the volume up. "Listen," he says. "Stay with this sound. Do not anesthetize it with distraction or noise." Because for him, this sense of exile is not a defect to be repaired. It is a compass pointing. To understand the reed, we have to look closely at its story. It once grew in a thick bed by the water, part of a swaying community of reeds. Wind passed through them, water nourished them, sun warmed them. Then one day a hand cut it from its root, peeled away its skin, pierced holes into its body, and lifted it to the lips. Now it has two memories living inside it, the memory of being rooted and the memory of being lifted. Our lives carry the same two memories. There is a level of us that remembers a time before we were a separate I, before name, status, story. A time of belonging so complete we cannot describe it in ordinary language, only hint at it through images of garden, sea, light, embrace. And then there is the shock of being cut out into an individual life, a particular body, a particular history, a childhood with specific wounds, a culture with specific expectations. We are shaped, carved and drilled with experiences that leave holes in us. From one angle, this looks like damage. From another, it is precisely what allows the divine breath to play through us. The metaphysics of separation, for Rumi, is not a cold theory of distance between creator and creation. It is the drama in which the soul wakes up to its own story. We feel torn because, at once, we are of this world and not of it. We belong here, and yet never fully. Many of us know this feeling in quiet, ordinary ways. You may be sitting at a successful job, surrounded by the markers of a life that is supposed to satisfy you, and suddenly an old restlessness rises. You cannot say what is missing. Nothing in particular is wrong, and yet something is not at home. Or you are standing in a crowd, even among friends or family, and there is a thin, transparent layer between you and everything you see. You laugh, you converse, but somewhere a flute is being played inside your chest, and its music does not quite match the scene. Rumi does not pathologize that mismatch. He sanctifies it. The song of the reed is his way of saying you are not crazy for feeling this way. You are hearing a metaphysical fact. You are registering, however dimly, both your distance from your source and your secret connection to it. Separation in his vision has two levels. On the surface, there is the experience of distance. Here we feel like an isolated self among many separate objects and people. God, if we think of God at all, seems far away, abstract, theoretical. The world looks like a field of unrelated pieces, each struggling for its own place. On a deeper level, however, separation is an appearance that conceals a more intimate reality. The reed may look cut off from the bed, but the very breath that pulses through it comes from the same one who nourished the marsh. The music that sounds like complaint is, at root, a praise. The H that feels like loss is, at root, a sign of unbroken connection. Rumi will later speak of the unity of being, where all existence is a single unfolding of the divine. But he does not begin with unity. He begins with the sense that unity has been lost. Because without tasting exile, union would mean little. So the metaphysics of separation is not meant to leave us stranded in despair. It is a stage in the unfolding of truth. To know what home is, we first have to feel that we are away from it. Notice how he chooses a flute, not a stone. A stone is solid, opaque, self-contained. A flute is hollow, fragile, and open. If the reed had refused to be cut, if it had insisted on staying whole and untouched, it would have remained a plant among plants. Safe perhaps, but silent, it is the very wound, the incision, the hollowing out that makes music possible. Rumi is quietly suggesting that our own wounds play a similar role. The parts of us that feel cut, broken, incomplete, our failures, our losses, our heartbreaks, are not merely tragic accidents in an otherwise smooth life. They create openings, places where breath can enter, places where we stop being sealed and begin to resonate. From this angle, the metaphysics of separation becomes the metaphysics of vulnerability. To be a soul in the world is to be an instrument waiting to be played. Yet there is a danger here. We can become so identified with our wounds that we forget what they are for. The reed could become obsessed with the story of how it was cut, who cut it, when, with what knife. It could replay those details endlessly. Rumi directs our attention elsewhere. Yes, the reed was cut. But listen, it is being played. The deeper question is not why was I wounded, but what breath moves through this wound now? What song is trying to be born from my particular history, my particular cut? This is where the metaphysics of separation turns toward meaning. The ache does not exist for its own sake. It is a movement, a pressure toward something. Underneath the personal story of loss is a more ancient longing to return, to rejoin, to rest in the embrace that preceded all our separate roles. Rumi hears in every human story echoes of this one story: the lover missing the beloved, the migrant missing the homeland, the child missing a lost parent, the friend missing a friend. Each particular separation is in his poetry, a shard of the great separation, the soul's apparent distance from the divine. And so he invites us to treat our longing not as an enemy, but as a guide. When we feel that subtle pulling, instead of immediately seeking distraction, we might pause and ask, what is this really for? Is this restlessness trying to push me toward a deeper honesty, a truer life, a more intimate way of being with the one who breathes me? In Rumi's world, the cosmos itself is structured around this movement. The reed is not the only one singing. He imagines stars, birds, rivers, trees, all stirred by the same homesickness. Everything is drawn by an invisible gravity toward its origin. Every being is, in its own tongue, chanting a version of the same song, bring me back. Let me come closer. Let me remember. The human soul is distinctive only in that it can become conscious of this pull. We can name it. We can resist it. We can cooperate with it. We can turn it into prayer, poetry, service, or we can drown it out in noise. The metaphysics of separation, then, is also a metaphysics of choice. We cannot choose whether or not to be cut. That is already done. We find ourselves here in a particular life, a particular time, with a body that will age and die. But we can choose what to do with our cut. We can harden around it, turning our hurt into bitterness, cynicism, and protective pride. Or we can let it stay open, allowing breath to move through it, allowing our life to become a flute through which something larger speaks. Rumi sides with the flute. To do this, however, we have to rethink what separation really is. If we believe it is absolute, if we think we are entirely on our own, an isolated self in a cold universe, then our longing will feel like torture. Our only goal will be to numb it. If we suspect, as Rumi does, that separation is a veil, not a wall, then longing becomes a source of hope. The pain of distance secretly witnesses to a deeper closeness. We would not miss the beloved so fiercely if we had not known the beloved in some way before memory. The reed, after all, sings because it remembers the river. In the chapters ahead, Rumi will say even more daring things. He will speak of the unity of being, of a reality in which the distance between creator and creation thins almost to transparency. He will suggest that the many are not truly apart from the one, but expressions of it. But he does not leap there too quickly. He allows us first to honor the feeling of exile, to let the song of the reed work on us, softening the surface of our lives, making us honest about what we really yearn for. Because to talk about unity without acknowledging the pain of separation would be to offer comfort too cheap. It would be to lay a bright slogan over a deep wound. Rumi does something more patient. He stands beside the reed and listens. He invites us to do the same with our own hearts. In that listening, a subtle shift begins. We start by thinking we are alone in our ache. Slowly we realize this ache is shared. It is woven into the structure of being itself. It is the key that will unlock for us the understanding that comes next, the realization that the one we miss has never entirely left. The cry of the reed, then, is not the end of the story, it is the doorway. Through it, the path opens toward a vision, in which separation itself begins to shimmer and the world we thought was fragmented reveals an underlying, luminous unity. Part 2. Wahdat al-Wujud, the unity of being and the illusion of duality. Beneath seeming difference, Rumi hears a single note. Many faces, one light. Many waves, one sea. Many lives, one breath. The phrase Wahdat al-Wujud, the unity of being, sounds technical, almost abstract. But what it points to, in Rumi's vision, is intensely intimate. It is less a doctrine he wants us to memorize and more a perception he wants us to taste. To reach it, we begin where we left off with separation. The reed complains because it feels cut off from its reed bed. We complain because we feel cut off from God, from each other, even from ourselves. At the everyday level, this makes sense. You are here, I am there. The tree stands outside the window. The stars burn millions of miles away. Creator and creation seem like two very different kinds of reality, one infinite and unseen, the other finite and visible. Rumi does not deny this level of experience. He walks, eats, laughs, grieves. He teaches law, interprets scripture, advises students. In all of this, difference is real and meaningful, and yet somewhere behind his eyes, another way of seeing is awakening. He begins to sense that what looks like two-ness is often only on the surface. Just as a single sun can appear, as many rectangles of light on a wall, or as many shifting colours on water, so the one reality appears as countless forms. In one of his images, he says the sunlight divides when it enters the house through many windows, but do not be fooled by the many shapes of light on the floor. The light itself is one. This is the heart of Wahdat al-Wujud. Existence in its depth is not a collection of independent things. It is a single radiant being, the divine expressing itself through an ever-changing dance of forms. Every creature, every event, every moment is a temporary window through which that one sun shines. From this angle, the separation we feel is real as an experience, but not final as a truth. To approach this, Rumi often turns to the language of love. When we are in love, the beloved fills our attention. The rest of the world fades, or reorders itself around one presence. We stop seeing scattered, unrelated details. We see everything as connected to that one face, that one name. For Rumi, the universe itself is in this state of love. The divine beloved is the centre, and everything that exists is, in some way, an expression of that love, either reaching toward it, reflecting it, or veiling it. Love, then, is not only a feeling we have inside, it is the energy that reveals unity beneath difference. When he speaks of the unity of being, Rumi is not asking us to deny the world we see or to collapse all distinctions into a vague blur. He is asking us to hold two lenses at once. With one lens, we see multiplicity. There are differences of character, culture, religion, temperament. There are genuine boundaries, responsibilities, and moral choices. With the other lens, we see that all of this occurs within a single field of being. Nothing that exists is truly outside that field. Everything is a wave on the ocean of God's presence, distinct for a moment, yet inseparable from the sea. He gives another image, a cluster of grapes and the juice made from them. So long as the grapes are separate, we can count them, compare them, speak of one as better or worse. Once they are pressed, the distinctions fade in the flow of a single drink. He is not saying life in this world is already that juice. Here we mostly see the cluster. We live amid comparisons, judgments, fears, preferences. We call this good and that bad. We divide friend from enemy, self from other. But he hints that there is a deeper juice of reality where the labels fall away and everything is held within the one. To even glimpse this, he says, is to be freed from a certain narrowness of vision. This is why he can write of death as a wedding with eternity. From the perspective of the separate self, death is a disaster. It is the end of all the roles we cling to, the dissolving of the hard boundary we imagine between me and everything else. From the perspective of unity, death is the moment the drop returns to the ocean. The grape is finally pressed into the wine of oneness. The costumes fall. What remains is the naked fact that our being has always been of God, in God, from God. When Rumi speaks of one who has truly awakened to this oneness, he says such a person has gone beyond good and bad. This can disturb us if we think he means there is no right or wrong. But that is not his point. He is pointing to a shift in center of gravity. For most of us, our sense of good and bad is deeply entangled with our ego. What benefits me? What threatens me? What flatters me? What frightens me? We divide the world according to a tight circle of self-interest. The one who lives in awareness of unity does not become indifferent to right and wrong. Instead, their sense of right and wrong opens beyond the ego. They see from the vantage point of the whole. From there, even painful experiences can be understood as part of a larger mercy. Even loss, even humiliation, even death can be seen as movements in a dance of return. So when Rumi says not to call such a person simply good or bad, he is saying conventional labels do not quite capture someone whose identity is rooted beyond the small self. How then do we approach this unity of being? For Rumi, argument will not get us all the way there. Reason can point in the right direction. It can show that we depend, moment by moment, on something beyond us. It can show that the boundary between self and world is porous. We breathe the same air, drink the same water, move through the same space. But the profound shift comes, again, through love. Love loosens the illusion of separateness. When you truly love someone, the line between my joy and their joy blurs. Their pain feels like your pain. Their flourishing becomes part of your own. Extend this further, and Rumi's vision appears. What if all beings were, in some way, beloved? What if, beneath all their flaws and masks, each one is a locus where the divine is present? In that case, harming another would be harming yourself. Mocking another would be mocking a face of God. And honoring another would be an act of honoring the one shining through them. The unity of being is not meant to float above life as a clever idea. It is meant to transform how we walk through the world. Standing at a window, we might see a beggar, a child, an enemy, a tree, a dog. Through the usual lens, they are separate, different value, different importance. Through Rumi's lens of unity, they are all scenes in one, vast theatre of the beloved's self-disclosure. Each one offers a particular angle on the same light. This does not mean we romanticize injustice or ignore harm. It means that even as we act to correct what is wrong, we do not lose sight of the deeper fact. Nothing and no one falls outside the circle of being. The illusion of duality, in his language, is the belief that there are two independent realities, God over here, the world over there, or my inner life here, outer events there, or sacred here, profane there. He wants to dissolve these hard lines without flattening the richness of life. Think of music. There is the underlying silence. There are the notes that break it. They seem opposed, sound versus silence. But in fact, the music depends on both. Silence holds the notes, gives them space to be heard, receives them when they fade. In an analogous way, Rumi sees the world as notes played on the silent ground of divine being. The notes are many and fleeting. The ground is one and abiding. When we cling only to the notes, we are tossed about by constant change. When we learn to feel the silent ground beneath them, a different kind of peace becomes possible. We still participate. We still love, strive, weep, rejoice. But we are less deceived by appearances. We begin to sense that every rise and fall occurs within a vast, unwavering presence. Sometimes glimpses of this come unbidden. You might be watching light move across a wall, or sitting with a dying loved one, or standing under a wide night sky. Suddenly the usual sense of being a small, separate centre fades. For a moment, everything is simply there, together, part of one field. There is no big announcement, no fireworks, just a quiet, undeniable okay-ness underlying whatever is happening. Moments like these are hints of the unity Rumi speaks of. He does not claim we can hold this vision all the time. He speaks of veils that fall and rise, of moods and states that shift. But he insists that the underlying fact does not change. There is, in truth, only one being, endlessly appearing as many. If this is so, then spiritual practice is not about acquiring something we lack. It is about clearing what obscures what has always been the case. In his language, the ego is the primary obscurity, the habit of seeing ourselves as isolated, self-sufficient in control. This habit tightens our heart and narrows our perception. Love, surrender, remembrance, service, these begin to soften that knot. As the knot loosens, the sense of a rigid boundary between me and not me thins. We discover a different way of resting in the world, one in which trust is more natural than fear. The unity of being, then, is not an excuse to escape from life. It is an invitation to be more present to it with less defensiveness. Because if everything that meets us is in some way coming from the same source, then every encounter can become a meeting with the beloved. Every joy is a caress. Every wound is, mysteriously, a kind of contact. Rumi's courage lies in taking this seriously. He does not speak of unity only when life is pleasant. He extends it to grief, to loss, to death. For him, these are not breaks in the divine story, but its deepest chapters. Of course, such a vision does not arise in a vacuum. It is one thing to speak about unity in general. It is another to have it embodied in a human relationship so intense that it shatters your previous sense of self. For Rumi, Wahdat al-Wujud is not only a metaphysical conclusion. It is the afterglow of a meeting with a man who became, for him, a mirror of that unity. The wandering dervish Shams of Tabriz entered Rumi's life like a storm and left like a vanishing star. In the furnace of their friendship, the walls between lover, beloved, and love itself began to melt. To understand how the unity of being moved from a doctrine he may have heard to a fire he lived, we have to look at this encounter more closely. For sometimes the ocean does not show itself through abstract reflection. It appears in the eyes of a single, burning human being. Part 3. The Mirror of the Master, the transformative role of Shams Tabrizi. Years before the world knew him as a poet of love, Rumi walked the streets of Konya as a respected scholar. He wore the robes of a jurist, taught in the madrasa, interpreted scripture, settled disputes. His days were structured by law and learning. Students gathered around him, notebooks in hand, eager for his commentary. From the outside, his life looked complete. From the inside, something was waiting. The fire he would later call Ishq, divine love, was present, but still largely contained, like a flame behind glass. His education was precise, his piety was sincere, his reputation was solid, and yet the deeper possibilities of his soul were still, in some way, dormant. It is into this poised, ordered life that Shams of Tabriz steps. Shams is not what Konya expects. He is a wandering dervish, unpolished, intense, more like a storm than a polite guest. Accounts describe him as fierce, uncompromising, uninterested in social niceties. He is not impressed by titles or authorities. He is looking for something very specific, a heart ready to burn. When he meets Rumi, by one account, as Rumi rides through the market with his students, something electric passes between them. Stories differ in detail, but they agree on the essence. Shams confronts Rumi with a question that cuts through to the root of his understanding. He challenges him not to embarrass him, but to expose a deeper hunger beneath all his knowledge. For Rumi, this encounter is like being struck by lightning. All the categories that had ordered his world begin to wobble. The safe distance between intellectual understanding and lived experience collapses. Here stands a man who seems to embody what Rumi has only read about: total absorption in God, radical indifference to status, an inward flame that does not care for appearances. Rumi recognizes in Shams a mirror, not a flattering mirror, the kind that reflects back the image we already like. A truthful mirror, the kind that reveals what has been hidden, both the beauty and the unfinished work. When two such souls recognize each other, ordinary social rules lose some of their grip. Rumi withdraws from his usual circles. He spends long hours, days, then months in intense companionship with Shams, speaking, listening, praying, falling into states of ecstasy. The language of teacher and student begins to dissolve. At times, Rumi appears as the student, at times Shams. At a deeper level, both are students of the same invisible teacher. From the outside, this looks like distraction, even danger. Rumi's students grow restless. Family members feel abandoned. Whispers spread, "Who is this stranger who has bewitched our master? Why has scholarship given way to song, law to longing?" From the inside, something else is happening. Shams is not primarily giving Rumi new ideas. He is giving him a new temperature. Through Shams, Rumi encounters a mode of being where God is not a distant object of study, but the immediate atmosphere of every breath. This presence is so real to Shams that worldly honours seem like dust to him. Standing in that field, Rumi's own latent love ignites. His heart, which had been a disciplined library, becomes a furnace. Words begin to behave differently. Instead of neatly arranged arguments, they erupt as poetry, spontaneous, burning, full of longing and bewilderment. He finds himself composing verses at night, in the street, in the mosque. Many of them he dedicates to Shams. At one level, they read as love poems from one man to another. At a deeper level, Shams becomes a name for the divine beloved itself. This is one of the mysteries of the master-disciple relationship in Rumi's world. The master is not worshipped as a rival to God. Rather, the master is a polished mirror in which God's qualities are so clearly reflected that the seeker cannot help falling in love. That love may first cling to the person, to their face, their voice, their presence. But over time, if the master is true, the attachment is gently redirected. The master says, in effect, "Do not stop at my reflection. Look through it. What you love in me is not mine. It is the one shining through." In this sense, Shams's role is profoundly metaphysical. Earlier we spoke of the unity of being as an ocean expressing itself as many waves. For Rumi, Shams is a wave in which the ocean becomes unmistakable. To love Shams is to be drawn toward the ocean. To lose Shams is to discover that the ocean was never confined to that single form. But Rumi does not arrive at this realization easily. As rumours, jealousy, and tension grow around their intense companionship, Shams disappears, perhaps by choice, perhaps under threat, perhaps through violence. Historians are unsure. Spiritually, however, the fact is clear: the form through which Rumi has encountered the beloved vanishes. For Rumi, this is a spiritual earthquake. He searches for Shams in the streets of Konya. He sends his son to faraway cities to bring him back. For a brief time, Shams returns, and the fire blazes even higher. Then he disappears again, this time for good. The pain of this loss is almost unbearable. Rumi pours it into poetry, ghazals of longing, confusion, rebuke, surrender. The beloved is gone. The mirror has shattered. The world seems emptied of colour, and yet inside this shattering another transformation is taking place. At first, Rumi thinks the source of his ecstasy is outside him, located in the person of Shams. With Shams gone, the question becomes ruthless. Was this fire dependent on one human form? Or was that form a door to something everywhere present? Slowly, through grief and remembrance, the answer emerges. He begins to sense Shams not as an absence in the world, but as a presence within his own heart. The more he calls Shams's name, the more he finds that name dissolving into another god. The lover he sought in the streets appears now in prayer, in silence, in the faces of others. At the height of this realization, Rumi can say things like, "I am Shams of Tabriz," not as a claim of superiority, but as a confession of unity. The separation between seeker and guide, between lover and beloved, melts. This is the deepest role of the true master, to vanish as a separate object so that the seeker may stand directly in the light. In this way, Shams embodies for Rumi the same pattern we saw in the reed. First separation and longing. Then a union so intense it seems to erase all distance. Then another separation, this time more shocking. And finally, the discovery that what we thought we had lost was, in a mysterious way, always within. The mirror breaks, but what it was reflecting does not. There is another aspect to Shams's role. He is not only a comforter. He is also a disturber. We often imagine a spiritual guide as someone who soothes us, reassures us, tells us we are fine as we are. Rumi's experience with Shams suggests something more demanding. A real master, in his world, is someone who refuses to let us remain half awake. They question our cherished assumptions. They expose our hidden pride. They ask whether our piety is alive or merely inherited habit. They may use shock, paradox, or unconventional behavior to jolt us out of complacency. By all accounts, Shams excelled at this. He did not care whether his words made Rumi more respected or less. He cared whether they made him more real. In his presence, the mask of successful scholar could not survive. Only the naked, yearning heart could endure. Rumi later extends this role of the mirror beyond Shams. He speaks of friends, enemies, strangers, even animals and elements as mirrors. Each reflects back to us some dimension of ourselves, or some quality of the divine we have yet to see. The difference with a master like Shams is the intensity and clarity of the reflection. He is like a polished, burning glass through which the sun's rays are focused. To stand before such a mirror is to feel the false layers of identity begin to melt. Of course, this cannot be imitated cheaply. Not every intense relationship is transformative in this way. Some simply tangle us deeper in ego, obsession, or dependence. Rumi is aware of this. What distinguishes a true spiritual mirror, in his experience, is the direction it finally points. Most of us will not meet a Shams of Tabriz, but we will, across a lifetime, meet people and events that play a similar role in miniature. Perhaps there is a friend whose honesty gently exposes your self-deceptions. Perhaps there is a teacher who awakens in you a love of truth you did not know you had. Perhaps there is a loss or crisis that strips away what you thought you could not live without, forcing you to find a different ground. From Rumi's perspective, all of these can serve as mirrors, if we are willing to look. The question becomes, how do I meet the Shams moments of my life? Do I resent and resist whatever disturbs my familiar identity? Or do I pause and ask, what hidden thirst is this revealing? What deeper love, what wider sense of self is trying to emerge through this disruption? The story of Rumi and Shams suggests that the most important transformations often begin not with comfort, but with a holy disorientation. Rumi's old world had to crack for a larger one to be born. His shift from respectable jurist to flaming poet was not an incremental adjustment. It was a death and rebirth, a lived example of the Fana and Baqa he will later describe, the annihilation of the old self and the emergence of a self rooted in God. Shams was the knife that began that surgery, and also the mirror that showed Rumi his own face as it changed. In the end, Rumi does not remain fixated on the historical details of Shams's life and disappearance. He turns Shams into a symbol, a name for the inner sun that burns away illusion. When he calls out Shams, he is calling both his beloved friend and the light that now rises within him. To read Rumi, or to listen to his verses sung in the still of night, is to stand for a moment before that same mirror. His words, born out of the fire of this friendship, begin to reflect us back to ourselves. We may feel something stir, a mixture of longing and recognition. We may sense, however vaguely, that behind our own public roles and private defences there is a deeper self waiting to be called forth. In that moment, Shams's work continues, not as a legend in a distant land, but as a possibility in our own life. The question is whether we will allow it. Will we let ourselves be seen that deeply? Will we let the masks crack, the library catch fire, the safe identity loosen? Rumi's answer, given in thousands of burning verses, is yes. Yes, he says, it will hurt. Yes, you will be misunderstood. Yes, parts of your old life will not survive. But on the other side of that burning is a way of living in which law and longing are no longer enemies, in which knowledge serves love, and in which every face, every loss, every joy becomes a mirror of the one you have been seeking all along. The master's task is not to give you something you lack. It is to reveal what, in your deepest being, you already are. Shams did this for Rumi. Rumi, through his poetry, now turns to us and offers the same mirror. Part 4. Ishq-e Haqiqi, the architecture of divine love. In Rumi's universe, love is not a decoration added to life once everything important is done. Love is the structure itself, the blueprint, the invisible geometry according to which existence is drawn. We are used to thinking of love as a feeling. It comes, it goes. It rises in a moment of beauty, fades in a season of disappointment, and we move on. Rumi asks us to consider something far more radical. What if love is not a mood inside us, but the current inside all things? What if our personal loves are tiny windows opening onto a far larger love that never began and will never end? When he speaks of Ishq-e Haqiqi, real, essential, divine love, he is trying to name this deeper current, not the love that demands, clings, or bargains, the love that simply is. To imagine it, we might think of an architecture, not of stone but of meaning, an unseen cathedral in which everything that exists is one of the pillars, one of the arches, one of the windows. Each creature, each moment, each joy and each wound is like a carved detail on that building. Some pieces we find beautiful, some we do not understand. But the whole, Rumi insists, is a single design, and the architect is love. This is why, for him, the story of creation is not a tale of power alone. It is a love story. The one wishes to be known, to be tasted, to be reflected, so the many appear. Worlds unfold, forms emerge. In that unfolding, separation seems real. A soul forgets its source and wakes up in a body, in a family, in a city, in a century. It asks, often without words, where do I belong? That ache is not an error. It is a structural feature of the architecture, a built in longing that keeps the soul facing, even through confusion, toward the one it came from. Human love, in Rumi's view, is one of the primary ways this longing surfaces. We fall in love with faces, with voices, with bodies, with landscapes, with tastes, with ideas. Each love has its own story, its own sweetness and its own breaking. Yet beneath all their diversity, he hears one phrase being spoken over, and over I am seeking the beloved. The beloved may appear as a friend, a teacher, a partner, a child. It may appear as work that calls to us, or music that unravels us. But through every form, a single presence comes and goes. When the form leaves, the ache remains. Rumi does not tell us to despise the forms. He asks us to see through them, to recognize that the intensity we feel is not caused by the limited form itself. It is caused by the infinite light it happened, for a time, to reflect. This is why loss plays such a central role in his vision. The reed flute cries because it has been cut from the reed bed. The lover cries because they have been cut from their beloved. Yet in both laments, something mysterious happens. The very pain of separation reveals the depth of connection. The wound proves the love. In the architecture of divine love, even separation has a purpose. It creates the distance in which longing can move, like wind through an open archway. It draws out the hidden capacities of the soul: patience, fidelity, surrender, trust. Without the taste of absence, presence would remain a concept. Rumi does not romanticize suffering for its own sake. He simply refuses to exile it from the design. He looks at every experience, pleasant or painful, and asks, "What is love building in me through this?" He invites us to see our life as a construction site where, behind the noise and dust, a sanctuary is slowly being raised. Divine love for him is also the great simplifier. It reorders all priorities. A life built only on fear and habit becomes a maze of small rooms, each with its own locked door. A life reoriented by love begins to open. Walls turn into curtains. What once felt separate and opposed reveals unexpected connections. Think of how we behave when love truly takes hold. A miser becomes generous. A proud person becomes willing to apologize. Time, energy, attention, all the things we once hoarded are given away with an ease that would have shocked our earlier self. No law has changed on the outside. The architecture inside has shifted. Rumi trusts this inner shift more than any external compulsion. He is a jurist who places a fire above the book. Not because the book is meaningless, but because without the fire of love, the words remain cold. Rules followed without love harden into hypocrisy. Practices performed without love freeze into empty performance. When love burns at the center, law becomes like the shape of a lamp. It protects and focuses the flame. It keeps devotion from scattering into mere sentimentality. Yet it is the light, not the glass, that exists for its own sake. In this sense, Ishq-e is not against reason, discipline, or form. It animates them. It is the energy that moves through prayer, through service, through remembrance. It is what makes a simple gesture, a cup of water given, a harsh word restrained, more than moral correctness. It makes it participation in the very life of God. Rumi is bold here. He does not speak of a distant deity who occasionally sends comfort. He speaks of the divine as an intimacy, already nearer to us than our own breath. Divine love, in his language, is not a one-way affection flowing from a high heaven down to a low earth. It is a mutual recognition. The beloved is seeking the lover as surely as the lover is seeking the beloved. This is why he can say that every true longing is holy, even when we do not yet know what we are longing for. We may think we are only chasing success, approval, security, pleasure. But if we listen more quietly, we may hear in those pursuits a deeper desire to be seen completely and not rejected, to rest in a love that does not depend on our performance. In Rumi's architecture, this desire is a doorway. He does not crush it. He purifies it. Success becomes a longing to offer our gifts back to their source. Approval becomes a longing to be known by the one who already knows us. Security becomes a longing for the only safety that cannot be taken, the shelter of the real. Pleasure becomes a longing to taste, in every sweetness, the sweetness of the giver. Notice how this shifts the meaning of devotion. It is no longer a bargain I obey, and in return you reward. It becomes a response having seen how you already love me. How could I not turn toward you? The heart is not bullied into surrender. It melts. Rumi loves images of melting, burning, dissolving. Not because he despises the human being, but because he has seen what happens to a drop of water when it joins the sea. It does not vanish into nothing. It becomes more itself than ever, but in a different way. Its boundaries soften, its fears fall away. It can participate in storms, in waves, in clouds, in rivers. It has not been destroyed. It has been expanded beyond imagination. Divine love, for him, is this sea. We are the drops who have forgotten our oceanhood. Spiritual practice is the gradual softening of the edges we have drawn around ourselves. The ego says, I am this and not that. I love these and not those. I can only be safe if I control. Love replies gently, but persistently, you are more than you think, and you are held by more than you can imagine. In the architecture of Ishq-e Haqiqi, control is a temporary scaffold. It has its function. It keeps us from collapsing while the deeper structure is being built. But it is not the goal. The goal is trust. Not Na'anvi passivity, but a deep relaxation into the reality that our life does not rest only on our own small shoulders. This trust shows itself in small, concrete ways, in the willingness to forgive, in the courage to admit when we are wrong, in the patience to sit with unanswered questions without rushing into cynicism or denial. Each of these gestures is like placing another stone onto the inner sanctuary. Because love is not only feeling, it is craft. It is the daily work of aligning thought, word, and deed with the one we claim to love. Rumi returns again and again to this. If your tongue says beloved, but your actions are harsh, telling, you are still in the outer courtyard. Divine love wants to move into the very center of your being until there is no room left for cruelty, for arrogance, for contempt. And yet he is gentle. He knows transformation is slow. The architecture of a soul is not remodeled in a single night. Walls that were built over years of fear do not crumble at the first glimpse of beauty. They crack, they loosen, they let in shafts of light. Then slowly they are replaced. To walk with Rumi is to accept being a work in progress. You are not asked to pretend that you already live in uninterrupted awareness of divine love. You are invited to remember, again and again, that beneath every mood, beneath every confusion, there is a foundation already laid by love itself. Sometimes this remembering will be clear. Sometimes it will be dim. But the architecture does not disappear when you forget it. The cathedral of divine love is not something you build from scratch. It is something you awaken to when you sit quietly with your own longing, when you listen to the reed inside your chest, when you allow joy to humble you and sorrow to soften you. In all those moments, you are tracing with your fingertips the contours of Rumi's vision. You are discovering, piece by piece, that the very structure of your being has always been, and will always be, held together by love. Part 5. Fana and Baqa, the annihilation of the self and subsistence in God. Every journey of love reaches a point where the old self cannot continue. Not because the self is evil in some crude sense, but because it is too small for what is being asked of it. It was designed for survival, for comparison, for control. Love asks for something else. It asks for surrender. Rumi names this threshold with two words, Fana and Baqa. They are like two sides of a single doorway. On one side, the annihilation of the separate self. On the other, a new kind of existence, a subsistence in God. The language can sound frightening. Annihilation. Erasure. We imagine spiritual life as self-improvement, not self-ending. Rumi understands this fear. So he gives us metaphors that soften the edges of the word. He asks us to imagine a candle at dawn. In the darkness of night, the candle seems powerful. Its small flame orders the room. It casts shadows. It makes us feel that we know where we are. Then the sun rises. The candle's light becomes unnecessary, even invisible. Has the candle died? In one sense, yes, its function is gone. In another sense, something greater has arrived. The room is not lost in darkness, it is flooded with a much vaster light. For Rumi, Fana is like that. The ego, self, with its narrow, flickering light, meets a sun it cannot compete with. It can either cling harder to its flame, or it can allow itself to be outshone. In being outshone, it is not destroyed as a creature of God. What dies is its claim to be the centre. We can also think of Fana as the melting of ice. An ice cube in the ocean has shape, name, outline. It says, I am this block, separate from all that water. When it melts, where does it go? It does not vanish into nothing. It becomes ocean. The ego experiences this process as death because it cannot imagine life without its familiar walls. It knows itself only as I against the world or I for myself, so when love begins asking for a deeper trust, it panics. This is often where a real, spiritual path departs from mere inspiration. As long as love only brings comfort, affirmation, sweet feelings, the ego is happy to participate. But when love begins to question our deepest attachments, our need to be right, to be admired, to be in control, something in us resists. Rumi does not condemn this resistance. He notices it. He speaks to it. He tells stories of lovers who hesitate at the threshold, who circle the house of the beloved but will not knock. He recognizes in them the same fear that lives in us. Fana is not a single dramatic moment where everything false is burned away once and for all. It is usually a series of small dyings. The dying of an illusion about who we are, the dying of a fantasy about how life must unfold, the dying of grudges we have carried for years because they made us feel solid. Sometimes these dyings are gentle, like leaves falling in autumn. Sometimes they are abrupt, like a branch breaking in a storm. A relationship ends. A role we depended on is taken from us. Our health falters. Our beliefs are shaken. Rumi would not say that every hardship is Fana, but he would ask, can this hardship become an invitation to Fana? Can we let go of something we were never meant to cling to so tightly, and in that letting go find a deeper ground? This is where Baqa comes in. Without Baqa, Fana would be sheer loss. With Baqa, annihilation becomes passage. Baqa is subsistence in God, continuing to exist, but in a new mode. The person who undergoes Fana does not evaporate from the world. They keep walking, eating, speaking, working. Their personality does not suddenly erase its quirks. What changes is the center of gravity. Before the self lived for itself. It calculated, what do I gain? How do I appear? How can I protect my image? After Baqa, the self lives as a transparent thing. It begins to see itself as a channel, not a container. Gifts are recognized as given, not owned. Actions are offered, not controlled for outcome. Rumi's own life embodies this. Before meeting Shams Tabrizi, he was a respected scholar, a pillar of his community. After Shams, something in him caught fire, his public reputation shattered, his routines dissolved, his careful identity burned. From the ashes, a new Rumi emerged. One who wrote thousands of verses, wept openly for God, danced in the streets. From the outside, it might have looked like madness. From the inside, it was Fana into Baqa. The scholar self had to die. The lover self, rooted in God, had to be born. But this pattern is not reserved for saints. On a smaller scale, it is available in ordinary days. Think of a moment when you swallowed your pride and apologized. The picture of yourself as always, right, had to die a little. In its place, a truer connection appeared. That is a taste of Fana and Baqa. Think of a time you gave something away that you were afraid to lose: time, money, attention. The anxious self that believed I am only what I can keep relaxed. In that relaxation you felt lighter, more spacious. That too is a taste of Fana and Baqa. In Rumi's language, Fana is dying before you die. Not physical death, but the death of false ownership. The death of the story that says I am separate, I am alone, I am the source of my own being. To die before you die is to let those stories fall away while you are still breathing. Then, when the final death arrives, it is not an enemy. It is a familiar passage. This inner dying is supported by practice. Rumi does not imagine Fana arriving out of nowhere in a life otherwise untouched by remembrance. He speaks of the repetition of divine names as a kind of gentle erosion. With every remembering, a little more of the hardness around the heart wears away. He speaks of sama, music, poetry, whirling as fire. The rhythms loosen the tight grip of the mind. The body spins, and the usual coordinates of me here, world there, blur. If done with sincerity and guidance, these states are not escape. They are rehearsal, moments in which the self tastes what it might be like to live with less boundary, more flow. In the vision of Fana and Baqa, spiritual guidance also matters. A teacher is not a dictator of behavior, but a mirror. Someone in whom Fana and Baqa are already alive, even if imperfectly. By being close to such a person, by serving them, contradicting them, loving them, we discover where our own ego resists. We see, often painfully, what we are still unwilling to surrender. Rumi's relationship with shams is the paradigm here. Shams did not come to decorate his life. He came to dismantle it, to expose the places where Rumi's piety was still mixed with pride, to push him past the limits of what he knew and into the space of what he was. For us, this kind of guidance might come through a spiritual teacher. It might also come through honest friends, demanding children, difficult colleagues, anyone who, by their mere presence, makes it impossible for our ego to stay comfortably asleep. The aim is not humiliation, it is humility. Humiliation says you are worthless. Humility says you are not the center, and that is a relief. Fana clears the throne. Baqa seats the rightful king. Psychologically, we could say that Fana is the loosening of rigid identity. I am not only my profession, not only my trauma, not only my reputation. When these outer garments change or fall away, something remains, an awareness, a presence. Rumi identifies that presence with the divine. To live in Baqa is to live from that presence. You still care, you still act, but you no longer believe that your existence depends on outcomes. You become like a flute through which a breath moves. The flute does not claim, "This melody is mine." It simply stays hollow, polished, available. This does not erase individuality. Flutes have different tones, lives have different shapes. Baqa does not make everyone the same. It makes everyone more truly themselves, but without the constant tremor of self-defensiveness. Rumi often hints that after Fana and Baqa, love itself changes flavour. Before love was mixed with fear, will I be loved back? Will I be abandoned? After love becomes more like sunlight. It shines because that is what it is. It may be returned. It may not. Either way, the heart keeps radiating. It cannot help it. To approach this in our own life, we do not need to dramatize. We can simply begin to notice where we cling most tightly, where we say, "Without this, I am nothing." Rumi would gently invite us to look deeper. Is it really true? Has there never been a moment, perhaps in grief or illness or surrender, when everything you relied on fell away, and yet something remained, silently aware? That something is the hint of Baqa, the quiet, witnessing life underneath all your roles. When you let a small ego story die and rest for a moment in that wider awareness, you are tasting what Rumi is pointing to. In the end, Fana and Baqa are not exotic states reserved for another world. They are woven into the fabric of this one. Every night you lay your plans down and sleep. Every breath you release old air and receive new. Every sincere act of letting go, however small, is a rehearsal for the great letting go. To walk this path with Rumi is to let these small rehearsals educate the heart, so that when love finally asks, very gently, "Are you willing to be no one so that I can be everything in you?" the heart will recognize the voice. It will have practiced saying, again and again, in 100 little ways, yes. Part 6. Tazkiyah al-Nafs, the purification of the soul and the ego. Within each of us there is a restless animal and a quiet mirror. The animal wants, resists, reacts. The mirror simply reflects. Rumi calls the restless, demanding part nafs, the ego, self. And the clarifying of the mirror he calls Tazkiyah, purification. Purification in his vision is not about hating the body or suppressing all desire. It is about cleaning the glass so that what it reflects is true. When dust covers a mirror, we do not scold the mirror, we wipe it. Likewise, the work of Tazkiyah al-Nafs, or purification of the ego, self, is not self-loathing. It is patient, steady cleaning. The ego, left unattended, inflates. It whispers, "I am the center. My feelings are the measure of reality. My advantage is more important than your well-being." Sometimes it is loud and obvious in its selfishness. More often it is subtle. It hides under good deeds, respectable plans, religious devotion. Rumi is particularly alert to this subtlety. He has seen how easily the ego can use even piety as a disguise, making sincerity a challenge. A person may fast, pray, serve, and still, at the core, be worshipping their own image as a holy person. This is why Rumi returns again and again to humility. Not as a pose, but as a medicine, he imagines the purified soul like the earth. People walk on it, throw their burdens onto it, dig into it. The earth does not protest. It receives. It transforms waste into nourishment, seeds into gardens. To be like this, Rumi suggests, is not weakness. It is strength of a very different kind. How does one move from the raw ego to such spaciousness? There is no single method. There are recurring practices. Rumi emphasizes 3 awareness, restraint, and remembrance. Awareness is the beginning. We cannot purify what we will not see. Awareness for Rumi is a gentle watching of the heart. Not obsessively, not with harsh judgment, but with honest curiosity. He would have us notice, for example, how we react when we are criticized. Does the body tighten? Does the mind rush to defend, to attack, to justify? In that moment, the ego is revealed, not to be crushed but to be known. Or notice how we feel when we give. Is there a quiet hope that the gift will be praised, remembered, rewarded? If so, the act is not worthless, but it is mixed. Rumi might call this nakal-i-kali an empty transfer, the form of giving without the full sincerity. Awareness invites us to deepen it. Restraint is the next movement. Once we see the ego's impulses, we begin slowly to delay their expression, not repressing in the sense of pretending they are not there, simply not obeying them immediately. Someone insults us. The reflex is to strike back. Restraint says, wait, breathe. Perhaps answer more softly. Perhaps not answer at all. This is not passivity. It is choosing from a wider range of responses than the ego's script. Rumi compares the untrained ego to a wild horse. Powerful, energetic, but dangerous if not bridled. The aim is not to kill the horse. It is to train it, so that its strength can be used for the journey, not for destruction. In practical terms, this training often involves small disciplines. Eating a little less than the appetite demands. Speaking a little less than the tongue desires. Sleeping a little less than laziness prefers. None of this is punishment. It is creating space between impulse and action so that another voice has a chance to be heard. That other voice is nourished by remembrance. Dika remembering God is for Rumi like water for a thirsty tree. Without it, even the most sincere efforts at moral improvement dry out. With it, change becomes less about forcing and more about growing. Remembrance can be explicit, repeating names of God, reciting verses, listening to poetry that turns the heart. It can also be quiet, pausing in the middle of a task to inwardly say, "You are here," letting beauty, pain, work, rest, all be occasions to recall that we live inside a presence, not outside it. As remembrance deepens, the quality of purification changes. At first, it may feel like we are always pushing against ourselves. Later it begins to feel more like aligning with a river. The current of divine love is already moving toward generosity, patience, mercy. Ethically, this shows up as a shift from rule-based goodness to love-based goodness. Rules still matter. They protect us from obvious harm. But Rumi wants us to go further. He wants goodness to become natural, almost like a reflex. Consider generosity. The ego gives in order to feel superior, or to secure favor, or to relieve guilt. The purified soul gives because it has realized that nothing was truly mine to begin with. What I call mine is a temporary trust. Money, time, skill, all are loans. Returning them to those who need them becomes a joy, not a loss. The same with tolerance. The ego tolerates difference only when it is convenient, or when it can secretly feel superior for being so tolerant. The purified soul sees itself in others. It recognizes that the same fear, the same longing, the same confusion that lives in me lives in you. This recognition dissolves harshness. It makes true forbearance possible. Rumi often sums up his ethics with brief, piercing images. Be like the sun in kindness and mercy. Be like running water in generosity. Be like the earth in humility. Each image links an inner quality to something in nature that does not struggle to be what it is. The sun does not force itself to shine. Water does not calculate whether to flow. The earth does not demand thanks before it yields crops. Tazkiyah al-Nafs is the process of becoming that effortless, not in the sense of never feeling resistance again, but in the sense that goodness becomes more in tune with our deepest nature than egoic grasping. We begin to discover that mercy feels more natural than cruelty, even if it is harder in the moment. This does not mean the path is smooth. The ego does not surrender all at once. It stages comebacks. It uses fatigue, disappointment, even spiritual pride. We may start to feel superior about our humility, proud of our service, attached to our image as a purified person. Rumi preempts this by emphasizing self-forgetting. Do the good deed and then let it go. Serve and then vanish from your own story. If praise comes, receive it lightly. If blame comes, examine it, take what is true, and let the rest fall. The less we fixate on ourselves, the less the ego can feed. Service to others plays a central role in this forgetting. Not as a performance, but as a discipline of love. When we care for the sick, feed the hungry, comfort the grieving, teach the ignorant, we are pushed beyond our narrow circle. Our convenience is interrupted. Our schedule is disturbed. In that disturbance, the structure of the ego loosens. Rumi does not separate this social dimension from inner purification. He sees them as one movement. To polish the mirror of the heart is to reflect the needs of the world more accurately. To respond to those needs with compassion is to further polish the mirror. It is a living feedback loop. There is also, in his guidance, a profound psychological realism. He does not expect the seeker to become emotionless. Anger will arise. Desire will arise. Fear will arise. The question is, what do we do with them? He suggests we treat them as visiting guests. They knock at the door of the heart. We open. We acknowledge them. We do not hand them the keys to the house. We seat them, listen briefly, and then remember the true owner of the house. In this way, even negative states become material for purification. Anger reveals where we still cling to control. Envy reveals where we still believe that God's generosity is limited. Arrogance reveals where we still forget our dependence. Seeing these is painful, but without seeing there is no cleaning. Over time, the cumulative effect of awareness, restraint, remembrance, and service is a softening. We may still make mistakes. We may still snap, still judge, still fail. But the heart recovers more quickly. It apologizes more readily. It does not cling so fiercely to its errors. Most importantly, it becomes more transparent. Rumi's aim is not to produce a morally flawless statue. It is to produce a living heart through which divine attributes can shine. Mercy, patience, wisdom, tenderness, firmness, all the qualities tradition attributes to God find in a purified soul a human echo. This is where Tazkiyah al-Nafs joins with Fana and Baqa. As the ego is cleansed of its distortions, the sense of a hard, separate I loosens. We begin to see that our truest identity is not the small self with its endless moods. It is the deeper awareness in which those moods rise and fall. Purification, then, is not about becoming less ourselves. It is about becoming less attached to the false selves we have constructed out of fear and habit. What remains is quieter, more spacious, more intimate with God. In everyday terms, a person engaged in Tazkiyah might look quite ordinary. They work, marry or stay single, raise children or care for parents, study, earn, rest. What distinguishes them is subtle. A softness in the eyes, a patience in conflict, a lack of hunger for praise, a readiness to help. They move through the same world, but they are not possessed by it. To move even a few steps in this direction is already significant. Rumi would not have us wait until we are perfectly pure to live with love. He would have us begin now in the middle of our contradictions. Notice the ego. Restrain it where we can. Remember the one who is beyond all ego. Serve where we are able. Each such gesture is a stroke of the cloth on the dusty mirror. Perhaps at first we see no change. The glass looks as clouded as ever, but over years, over decades, a clarity appears. Light begins to move through us with less distortion, and in that increased light we may discover a quiet joy. Not the excitement of the ego getting what it wants, but the peace of being a little more aligned with what is true, a little more honest, a little more kind. That joy, Rumi might say, is a sign. It is the heart's way of telling us the mirror is beginning to remember what it was made for. Part 7. The Alchemy of Suffering. How the wound becomes the light. Sometimes what hurts the most is not the pain itself, but the sense that it is pointless. A loss that cannot be undone. An illness that lingers. A betrayal that rearranges what we thought was true. In those moments, suffering feels like a brute fact, a meaningless weight dropped into our life. We ask why, and usually we hear no answer. Rumi does not offer us a simple explanation. He does not say that every wound is deserved, or that grief is an illusion we should simply rise above. Instead, he invites us to look again at the wound itself, to approach it not as an enemy to be conquered, but as a teacher that has arrived uninvited. He dares to say that within the very place we feel torn apart, a new kind of light can appear. For Rumi, suffering is a kind of alchemy, not a theory, not a slogan, but a slow inner transformation in which something heavy and dark is cooked, refined, and turned into something transparent. The fire that performs this work is not our anger or our self-pity. It is love. Not sentimental love, but that deeper current he calls Ishq, the love that is already moving through all things. Think of metal placed in a furnace. From the outside, it looks only like destruction. The solid form is broken down, edges blur. Heat pushes everything to a crisis. But within that crisis, something subtle is happening. Impurities separate. What was rigid becomes malleable. The same fire that could destroy is, in careful hands, a means of reshaping. Rumi treats the human heart in the same way. When we encounter loss, the first impulse is to harden. We close in on ourselves. We vow never to trust again, never to hope again. But he suggests that if we stay only in that reaction, the fire of suffering burns us without changing us. The alchemy begins when we dare to stay present, to feel what is there without rushing to numb it or explain it away. He uses the image of a wound, A wound is an opening where the skin has been broken. It is a place of danger and tenderness. Yet it is also the only place where medicine can enter, the only place where the inner and outer worlds meet. When Rumi says that the wound is the place where the light enters you, he is not romanticizing pain. He is naming this paradox. What breaks us open can also break us out of a prison we did not know we were in. Many of our prisons are invisible. The prison of always being in control. The prison of needing to be right. The prison of living for the approval of others. These walls feel like safety until life presses against them. Then we discover how small they are and how much of the world we have walled out. Often it is a crisis that cracks these walls, a failure, a humiliation, a loss that cannot be fixed by our usual strategies. In that crack, the light of a different perspective can appear. We see that we are not the role we played, not the mask we wore, not the success or image we tried to maintain. We are more fragile than we thought, and also more spacious. Rumi calls this movement Fana the burning away of the false self. But he never stops at burning. Beyond Fana is Baqa, subsistence in a deeper ground, a life rooted in something that does not depend on constant control. To walk this path, we have to allow suffering to become conscious. Rumi would not advise us to drown in it or to cling to it as an identity. Instead, he invites a kind of gentle witnessing. Stay with the feeling. His stories whisper. Listen to what it asks of you. Perhaps the wound is asking us to let go of an image of ourselves we can no longer carry. Perhaps it is asking us to soften toward others who carry similar pain. Often the light that enters through our wound is simply this. We become more human, more able to see the hidden struggles around us, more reluctant to judge quickly, more willing to say, I don't know, but I am here with you. In Rumi's universe, suffering is not a punishment but a summons. It calls us away from the surface of things into depth. When something we relied on collapses, the question arises, what, if anything, is truly reliable? What can be taken from us and what cannot? These are not abstract questions for him. They are the doorway to God. He often speaks of polishing a mirror. Our heart, he says, is like a mirror that has grown rusty. We no longer reflect reality clearly. We see only our fears, our projections, our habits. The friction of life, the disappointments, the misunderstandings, the little hurts, and the great heartbreaks can either make us bitter or polish that surface. When we respond with honesty, humility, and remembrance, the rust begins to thin. What appears is not a new belief, but a clearer seeing. This does not mean we have to approve of injustice or call cruelty a blessing. Rumi does not ask us to erase our moral sense. The alchemy he describes happens inside us, not in the outer event. We are free to resist oppression, to seek healing, to ask for help. But even as we struggle outwardly, there can be an inner movement from, why is this happening to me? To how is this calling me deeper? In practical terms, this alchemy often moves in small steps. A night when we finally let ourselves cry. A conversation where we confess our confusion instead of pretending to be fine. A moment of prayer that is nothing more than sitting in silence, letting our exhaustion rest in something larger than us. Rumi's path is not about dramatic displays of endurance. It is about honest contact with what is, held in the light of a love that does not turn away. There is also a communal dimension to this. Our wounds can isolate us, but they can also connect us. When we imagine that we alone are broken, shame thickens around the pain. When we see that suffering is part of the human condition, our heart's field widens. Rumi often speaks in the plural, we, not I. Our tears join the river of all who have ever grieved, and in that river we are carried, not abandoned. Out of such shared vulnerability, compassion grows. The one who has known betrayal becomes gentle with those who fear trust. The one who has sat in the darkness of depression can sit more patiently with another's heaviness. The wound, once a private catastrophe, becomes a hidden ministry. It is not advertised, but it moves silently through how we listen, how we respond, how we forgive. For Rumi, the final measure of this alchemy is not how much we have suffered, but how much our suffering has expanded our capacity to love. Has it softened or hardened us? Has it turned us inward in resentment or outward in understanding? Has it deepened our reliance on the transient or our trust in what does not pass? He would say that when a wound truly becomes light, we no longer cling even to the story of our pain. We remember it, but we are not defined by it. What was once a center of identity becomes a doorway. Through it, we step into a larger sense of self, not isolated, not self-sufficient, but held. In this way, suffering is woven back into the great movement of divine love. It remains sorrowful. It remains serious. Yet it is no longer meaningless. It becomes part of the mysterious process by which the heart is hollowed out, made spacious enough to receive what it was always meant to hold. When the next wound comes, and in a human life, it will, we may still flinch. We may still cry out. But somewhere inside, another response has begun to grow. A quiet, almost imperceptible turning toward the light that we now know hides, even here, at the very site of our breaking. Part 8. The Cosmic Dance, the Philosophy of Sama and Whirling. Under turning skies, everything moves in circles. Planets spin around their suns. Seasons loop through birth, decay, and renewal. Even our thoughts return, again and again, to the same questions. In this circling, Rumi saw more than a pattern of nature. He saw a choreography of the soul. Sama, the Sufi practice of sacred listening and whirling, is Rumi's most visible expression of this insight. To the casual observer, it may look like a performance. Men in white skirts spin with one hand raised and the other lowered. Flutes sing, drums pulse, voices recite verses that most of the audience cannot fully understand. But beneath the choreography is a philosophy, a way of relating to existence itself. At the heart of Sama is listening. Before any turning begins, there is a silence, a stillness in which the dervish becomes receptive. He listens not only to music, but to something behind the music. Rumi would call it the call of the beloved, the divine addressing the heart in a language older than words. Once this inner listening is awakened, movement follows almost naturally. Love, as Rumi insists, is not static. It is a force that draws, pulls, and sets things in motion. The planets do not orbit the sun because they have been commanded by a distant voice. They orbit because they are caught in a field. In Sama, The dervish steps consciously into such a field. He turns around an unseen center, surrendering the illusion that he himself is the still point of the world. Consider the posture of the whirling dervish. One hand is turned upward, open to receive. The other is turned downward, open to give. He becomes a conduit, not a container. Grace flows in, then flows out. This is a living picture of Rumi's philosophy of unity. Nothing truly belongs to me, everything passes through. The tall felt hat worn by the dervish is sometimes said to represent the tombstone of the ego. The white robe beneath it resembles a burial shroud. To begin the dance is to consent in a symbolic way, to die before you die, to let the rigid, self-centered sense of I loosen. As the body spins, that old center cannot hold. Another center is sought, a stillness that does not depend on controlling every step. In the midst of the turning, something interesting happens. If you spin only a few times, you feel dizzy. You lose balance. But if you continue, a new balance emerges. The body discovers a rhythm. The eyes often remain softly open, but they are no longer collecting details. What remains is sensation, heartbeat, breath, and the music that wraps all of this into a single experience. This is not escapism. Rumi does not use sama to flee the world, but to re-enter it with different eyes. Whirling is an enacted reminder that the ground of reality is movement, yet there is a still point within that movement. The dervish is like an electron in orbit and a silent nucleus at once. He is both wave and center. The cosmic dimension of this practice is clear in Rumi's imagery. He speaks of galaxies spinning, of dust particles dancing in a beam of sunlight, of atoms turning in praise. Everything for him is already engaged in sama. The formal ceremony is just a conscious joining of what is always already happening. The human being, so often lost in worry and calculation, re-aligns with a more primordial rhythm. Philosophically, sama embodies the unity of being. As the dervish turns, the boundaries between self and world begin to blur. There is the sensation of air on the skin, the floor beneath the feet, the sound entering the ears. Where does I stop and not I begin? The music shapes the movement shapes the feeling. The dervish becomes a point of meeting between earth and sky. In that state, dualities soften, inner and outer, self and other, sacred and ordinary. They do not disappear, but they are seen differently. The dervish is still a particular person with a name and a story, but for a time that story is held within a larger story. I turn, he might say, not as myself alone, but as a fragment of the great turning that sustains everything. Rumi is careful, though not to confine this wisdom to a specific ritual. Not everyone will whirl. Not everyone will attend a sama. But everyone, he suggests, is invited into the same realization. Everyday life is full of small summer moments. Walking down a street, we are turned by the wind, by sounds, by passing faces. Sitting at a desk, our thoughts whirl around worries and hopes. The question is not whether we move, but around what we move. Are we circling our fears, our grudges, our cravings? Or are we slowly learning to orbit a quieter, more generous center? Sama dramatizes this choice. In the ceremony, the center is not the ego's agenda. It is the remembrance of God. The music and motion are aimed at thinning the self's tight grip so that something larger can be felt. This is why Rumi insists that true sama is not entertainment. It requires discipline. There is adab, inner and outer courtesy. There are rules for how to walk, how to stand, how to bow, how to begin and end the turning. Far from suppressing ecstasy, this structure protects it from becoming chaos or display. Freedom in this context is not the absence of form, but movement that ripens within a form. From a philosophical angle, Sama also addresses a tension that many spiritual seekers feel. On the one hand, there is a desire for transcendence, for going beyond the body. On the other, there is an intuition that truth must be lived, not just thought. By involving the whole body in remembrance, Sama refuses the split between spirit and flesh. The foot on the floor and the heart in contemplation are part of the same act. Someone watching might ask, what is the point of all this turning? The answer is not a concept, but an experience. To whirl long enough is to discover that the world keeps turning even when you let go of your tight grip on it. Your problems do not vanish, but your way of holding them shifts. You taste, however briefly, what it is like to be in motion without being anxious about every step. Even if we never set foot in a Sama hall, we can let its philosophy soften how we move through our days. We can remember that every routine, washing dishes, driving, working, has a rhythm. We can choose, sometimes, to align our breath and attention with that rhythm rather than fighting it. To feel the body as part of a wider dance. To notice that we are being moved by countless forces we did not create. In the end, the cosmic dance Rumi speaks of is not a spectacle out there, but a way of seeing. We are already spinning on a planet that whirls through space. Our hearts are already beating in a pattern we did not design. Sama and the whirling it contains is a way of bowing to that reality, of saying, with the whole body, I am not the center, but I can turn in harmony with the center that holds all things. From this recognition, humility grows, so does joy. Not the fleeting joy of distraction, but a quieter gladness at belonging to a universe that dances. Rumi's whirling dervish is, in the end, an image of each of us when we remember, when we listen, when we allow ourselves to be drawn into a movement that began long before we were born and will continue long after we are gone. A movement whose name, in his language, is love. Part 9. The Ocean of the Masnavi, Teaching Through Parable and Paradox. Across Rumi's vast body of work, the Masnavi stands like an ocean. 6 long books of poetry, thousands of lines, countless characters and images. For centuries, seekers have waded into its waves, some to the ankles, some to the chest, a few disappearing into its depths. Rumi himself called it the roots of the religion. Yet when we open it, we do not find a dry list of doctrines. We find stories. Donkeys and kings, merchants and beggars, prophets and drunkards, wise fools and foolish sages. On one page, we encounter a parable that sounds like a children's tale. On the next, a razor-sharp reflection on the nature of the soul. It can feel chaotic, even confusing. Why does a mystic of such depth choose to teach through fables and jokes, sudden turns and wandering digressions? To understand this, it helps to remember Rumi's basic conviction. The heart is transformed not mainly by argument, but by tasting, a direct inner shift. If he simply laid out his metaphysical system in neat propositions, our minds might nod, but our lives would remain untouched. So he uses the Masnavi as a kind of vessel. Into the clay of ordinary stories, he pours the wine of another meaning. Take the famous tale of the elephant in the dark room. A group of people, never having seen an elephant, are led into a pitch black space where one stands. Each touches a different part. One holds the trunk and declares, an elephant is like a hose. Another feels the ear. No, it's like a fan. Another, touching a leg, insists it's a pillar. Each is partly right and entirely wrong. The light is missing. On the surface, this is a simple illustration of partial knowledge. But Rumi uses it to speak about spiritual perception. Our concepts, our traditions, our personal experiences, they all grasp at parts of a reality that exceeds them. Without the light of direct awareness, we argue, we separate, we form factions around incomplete truths. The story does not just inform us of this. It places us inside the dark room. We recognize ourselves among those arguing in the shadows. This is one way the Masnavi works. It does not preach from a distance. It stages our own inner life in front of us. We see our greed in the miser clutching his gold, our vanity in the proud grammarian who cannot swim, our hidden devotion in the simple shepherd who talks to God in clumsy, heartfelt words. Rumi does not condemn these figures. He exposes them with humour and tenderness, so we can recognize and soften. Parable for him is not decoration. It is a tool for bypassing our defences. If someone tells us directly, "You are arrogant," we resist. If we are told a story about an arrogant man who misses the point because of his pride, our guard lowers. We listen, we laugh, and in the quiet that follows, a small inner voice says, "This is about you." Then there is paradox. Rumi loves to speak in sentences that seem to contradict themselves. Die before you die. Silence is the language of God. All else is poor translation. Or in the Masnavi's narratives, he will flip our expectations. The apparent sinner turns out to be closer to God than the pious man. The loser of a worldly argument walks away with the real victory. Why this love of paradox? Because the truths Rumi is pointing to cannot be fully held by the ordinary mind. The mind works by contrast this or that, true or false. But spiritual reality, as he sees it, is more like a circle than a line. Opposites arc toward each other. Strength is found through acknowledging weakness. Real knowledge begins by admitting how little we know. Paradox is a way of loosening the mind's rigid categories. When we hear something that does not fit, we are forced to pause. That pause is precious. In it, a deeper intuition can arise. Not a new concept to replace the old, but a more spacious way of holding them both. The Masnavi constantly invites us into this widening. The form of the work itself reflects this. Stories begin, then are interrupted by digressions, reflections on the soul, side tales, Quranic echoes, lines of praise, sudden laments. Just as we settle into one narrative, Rumi breaks off and spirals into what seems like another. Sometimes he returns, sometimes he does not. At first, this can feel like distraction. With time, we notice a pattern. Life itself unfolds this way. We set out on a path, then a crisis diverts us. We plan one story and another breaks in. Old themes return. New ones emerge in the middle of something else. The Masnavi does not impose an artificial order on this. It mirrors the living, entangled texture of existence. Yet underneath the apparent wandering, a current is moving in, one direction from forgetfulness to remembrance, from separation to unity. Think of the Masnavi as an ocean seen from above. Waves seem to crash at random. Close up, we experience only the rise and fall beneath our feet. But from a higher vantage, we begin to sense larger patterns, tides, currents, slow movements gathering over time. Rumi writes from that higher vantage, while still honouring the choppy surfaces we actually live in. Another important feature is his use of layers. Every story has at least two. There is the literal plot. Then there is the inner meaning. Often there are more. A tale about a king and his servant can be read as social commentary, as psychological allegory, as a map of the soul's relation to God. Rumi rarely tells us which is correct. He trusts the reader or the listener to find the layer they are ready for. This open-endedness is part of the Masnavi's power. It meets each generation differently. A jurist might hear in it an ethic of mercy. A philosopher, a metaphysics of unity, a weary person, a voice of consolation. This is not because the work is vague, but because its symbols are rich enough to hold many meanings without collapsing into a single, narrow reading. At times, Rumi even uses the Masnavi to question the very tools he is using. He will interrupt a teaching with a confession of the limits of language. Words, he says, are like fingers pointing to the moon. They are needed, but they are not the thing itself. He tells a story, then warns us not to cling to the shell of the story. Break it open, he urges, and taste the kernel. This brings us to a subtle point. The Masnavi is not meant to be merely studied. It is meant to be inhabited. Recited, memorized, chewed upon. In traditional circles, verses are repeated in gatherings, woven into prayer, used as medicine for particular states of heart. The ocean becomes part of the bloodstream, one small cup at a time. For those of us meeting it across languages and centuries, the invitation is similar. We may not have the time or training to explore every story, but we can let a few of them work on us. We can sit with the elephant in the dark, with the polished mirror, with the bewildered lover. We can notice which images cling to our memory, which lines return uninvited when we are confused or afraid. That is the Masnavi doing its quiet work. Perhaps most importantly, Rumi's ocean teaches us to hold our own life as a kind of parable. Events that once seemed purely random or cruel may hide a lesson, not in a simplistic sense of everything happens for a reason, but in a deeper sense everything can be received. Paradox plays a role here too. We are asked to live fully in the particular details of our story, this body, this history, these relationships, while also recognizing that no single story can contain who we truly are. We are a character in the narrative and the awareness in which the narrative appears. Both are true. The Masnavi does not resolve this tension. It teaches us to dwell in it with more grace. Standing on its shore, we might feel overwhelmed. How can we possibly cross such an ocean? Rumi's answer, scattered across its waves, is simple. You do not cross it by your own strength. You let yourself be carried. Story by story, paradox by paradox, a different buoyancy grows. What once sank you, your questions, your doubts, your contradictions, becomes the very water in which you learn to float. In this way, the Masnavi is less a book to master than a sea in which to be unmade and remade. Its parables and paradoxes are not puzzles to solve, but doors to walk through. Each door leads a little further from the cramped rooms of certainty into a wider, more spacious dwelling. A place where, as Rumi suggests again and again, the mind bows, the heart listens, and the soul remembers the vastness it came from. Part 10. The fire of the Divan, ecstatic, utterance, and the voice of the beloved. Far inside Rumi's world there is a region where language stops behaving itself. It no longer walks carefully in straight lines, like a scholar crossing a courtyard with his books. Instead it runs barefoot, it whirls, it cries out, it breaks into song. That region is the fire of the Divan. If the Masnavi is a wide river of teaching, patient and instructive, then the Divan-e-Shams is a volcano. It is not composed in the calm of a study. It erupts in the middle of the night, in the courtyard after music, in the dust of the dance. It is Rumi seized by longing for his vanished friend, Shams of Tabrizi, and through that longing, seized by something even larger, the presence of the beloved. In these poems, he almost never tries to explain. He does not carefully define concepts or build logical steps. He cries, he laughs, he complains, he praises. Often all of that happens in a single ghazal. A ghazal is a love poem, but in Rumi's hands it is more like the orbit of a planet around a sun it cannot leave. Each couplet turns again around the same burning centre U. Sometimes U is Shams. Sometimes it is clearly God. Sometimes the boundary dissolves and we can no longer tell which is which. This is part of the secret of the Divan. On the surface, it can seem like a book of human love poetry. A man grieving his friend, a lover chasing an absent beloved. Yet Rumi uses Shams's very name as a doorway. Shams becomes a mask for the divine, the way a flame is a mask for fire. The face of one man opens into the face of the one. In these poems, Rumi does not speak about the beloved from a distance. He lets the beloved speak through him. One moment he is the lover, desperate, small, calling out, "Where are you?" The next moment the voice shifts. Suddenly it is the beloved speaking, comforting, teasing, commanding. The poem becomes a mirror in which two faces appear, then merge, then separate again. To listen to the Divan is to hear that play of voices. Sometimes it feels like overhearing a private conversation. Sometimes it feels like listening to your own hidden heart being addressed. Because for Rumi, the real aim is not to perform a drama about someone else's love. It is to awaken in you the memory of your own. Ecstatic utterance means this love has grown so intense that ordinary speech can no longer hold it. Words begin to behave like sparks, leaping out of the fire that is burning inside. They may contradict each other. They may blur the lines between reverence and scandal. Rumi, who knows the discipline of theology, lets go of careful balance here. He risks saying too much, or saying it too wildly, because to say less would be dishonest. The imagery of the Divan reflects this risk. Wine overflows the cup. The tavern becomes a sanctuary. The Kabara, often a figure for Shams or for God, moves from guest to guest, intoxicating them. this is not about earthly drunkenness. It is about being carried beyond yourself, beyond your caution, into a clarity that comes only when the tight grip of the ego relaxes. Rumi returns again and again to the moth and the flame. The moth circles the candle drawn by a light it cannot understand. At last, it can no longer keep a safe distance. It rushes in and disappears. To the outside eye, this is destruction. To Rumi, it is completion. The moth has become what it loves. In the same way, the voice of the lover in the Divan burns to be consumed. I am nothing, he says in many forms. He insults his own cleverness, he mocks his status, he calls his previous piety a child's game. He wants only one thing to lose, himself completely in the one he adores. This is Fana not in the cool language of doctrine, but in the sobs and laughter of someone standing on the edge of the fire. Formally, these poems are crafted with great skill. They move in intricate meters and rhymes, yet they were often uttered in a single rush during Sama, the spiritual listening and whirling that marked Rumi's gatherings. Disciples scrambled to write down what poured from his mouth. The poems carry that improvisational quality. They remember the spinning of bodies, the drum, the reed flute, the circle of listeners whose hearts were also on fire. Because of this, the Divan does something unusual. It keeps one foot in art and one in raw experience. It is beautiful, but it is not polite. It is refined, but it is not tame. You can study its symbolism, its use of classical Persian meters, its echoes of earlier poets. Yet if you only do that, you will miss the point. The real subject is not poetry. It is a heart that has been unmade and remade by love. When Rumi speaks in this register, doctrine almost falls away, not because he rejects it, but because another urgency has taken over. He is like a man who has spent his life carefully describing fire and is now actually inside the blaze. He has no time to repeat the definitions. He can only shout what it feels like. And yet, even here, guidance is taking place. The beloved's voice, as it appears in these poems, is not merely sweet. It can be sharp, it scolds the ego, it tears away pretense, it refuses the lover's demand to possess. Over and over, the beloved says, in many different ways, you cannot have me the way you own other things. You must become what you seek. In this sense, the ecstatic speech of the Divan is not a private indulgence. It is a training. The listener is drawn into a drama in which I keeps dissolving into you, and you keep speaking from inside I. Slowly the wall between them looks less solid. The unity of being is no longer an idea, it is a felt confusion. Who is calling, and who is answering? Whose voice is this? For us, centuries later, the fire of the Divan may feel distant. The language is old, the cultural codes are different. But the movement it describes is not unfamiliar. Perhaps you remember a time when grief cracked your posture, and words came out of you that you did not plan. Perhaps there was a moment of joy or awe when you blurted out something that surprised you. For Rumi, those moments are small doors into the same house. The Divan invites us to trust a certain kind of overflowing, not every impulse, not every reaction, but those utterances that arise when the heart is stripped of calculation. When you are too honest to perform, he would say, Listen to what you cry out in the middle of the night. Listen to what your chest says when it breaks. There the beloved may already be borrowing your tongue. In that sense, reading the Divan is a double listening. We listen to Rumi, the man who loved Shams so fiercely that his longing ignited 40,000 verses. And through that we listen for a subtler voice, the one speaking through him. The voice that keeps calling every soul out of its small enclosures into a love so large that even words begin to burn. The fire of the Divan is not meant to stay on the page. It is meant to spread, not as noise, not as drama, but as a quiet permission to let love speak less guardedly in our own lives, to let our well-trained language crack open just enough for a different voice to come through, the voice of the beloved, using whatever words we have to say again what it has always been saying. Come closer. You were never really far. Part 11. It is what it is, the prose wisdom of Fihi. In plain gatherings on worn carpets, another side of Rumi appears. Here he is not whirling. He is sitting. He is talking to students, to visitors, to skeptics and princes. The drums have quieted. The reed flute leans against the wall. Out of these evenings comes a different kind of book, Fihi, literally. In it, what is in it? The title itself is a kind of shrug, almost an admission. These are not polished treatises. They are whatever arose in the moment. A question, a story, a comment, an aside. A verse of the Khan is recited, perhaps a line of poetry. Rumi responds. Someone objects. He responds again. Later his disciples write down what they can remember. If the Divan is a lightning storm, Fihi is a lamp. The light is gentler, but it lasts. It is the light that lets people find their way across the uneven ground of daily life. This is Rumi the teacher, Rumi the spiritual director, Rumi not carried away by ecstasy, but rooted in the ordinary work of guiding human beings. Here the themes are familiar. He speaks about love, about the ego and the soul, about suffering and joy, about the distance between outer religion and inner reality. But he approaches them not as abstractions. He approaches them through whatever happens to be in front of him. A man asks about free will. Rumi picks up a cushion, throws it, and says, "There, you could have ducked." Another man complains of hardship. Rumi speaks of the chickpea boiling in the pot, crying out as the cook stirs it, "Why are you hurting me?" Because, the cook replies, "I am making you delicious. You were just green. Now you will be nourishment." Through such images, he makes the highest ideas walk on the ground. He has no interest in impressing people with complexity. He speaks instead to the places where they are actually stuck, their resentments, their fears, their hunger for status, their confusion about why a merciful God allows them to be broken. The phrase, "is what it is," can sound like resignation. In Rumi's voice, it means something else. It means beginning from truth, from reality as it is, not as we wish it to be. He is not asking us to be passive. He is inviting us to see clearly, to stop arguing with what has already arrived, and to ask instead, how can I meet this moment in a way that reveals the beloved? For him, clear-seeing is the first mercy. Most of our suffering, he suggests, comes from misperception. We imagine we are abandoned when we are being transformed. We believe we are losing when we are being freed. We cling to forms that have already completed their work in us. Fihi ma fihi is full of stories that gently turn our perspective until the same event looks very different. Unlike the Masnavi, which unfolds its parables along carefully woven lines of verse, this prose feels spontaneous. It starts in one place and ends somewhere else entirely. It doubles back. It contradicts expectations. It is more like listening to the weather of a mind than reading a blueprint. Yet beneath this looseness, a few threads keep reappearing. One thread is his distrust of second-hand knowledge. He is harsh with people who are satisfied just to recite. What good is it, he asks, to memorize recipes and never taste the food? What use is a lantern that is never lit? He presses his listeners toward experience. Try, pray, serve, suffer consciously. Do not only think about God, live in a way that allows God to become real in you. Another thread is his constant return to the heart. Not the heart as sentiment, but as a subtle organ of perception. For Rumi, the heart is a mirror. If it is rusted with greed and pride, it reflects nothing. If it is polished by humility and remembrance, it reflects the light of the real. In Fihi ma Fihi, he offers many small practices for this polishing, thanking instead of complaining, noticing when the ego flares and not feeding it, keeping company with those whose presence awakens you. This book also shows Rumi as a bridge between worlds. He speaks to people committed to religious law, and he does not discard that law. He honors it. But he keeps pointing beyond the letter to the spirit. He explains Sama, the listening to music and poetry, that some of his contemporaries might mistrust. He shows how the dance is not an escape from religion, but a deepening of it when guided by love and discipline. In these talks, he is not afraid to meet power. He writes letters to rulers. He gives counsel to officials. He reminds them that their authority is borrowed, that they will answer for how they treat the weak. At the same time, he consoles the powerless, urging them not to see earthly hierarchies as final. The only real kingship, he says, is servanthood before God. What is distinctive about this prose is its warmth. Even when he is sharp, he is not remote. He speaks as someone who knows weakness from inside. He knows vanity. He knows anger. He knows how hard it is to forgive. The authority in his words comes not from distance, but from passage. He has been through the burning himself. For a modern reader or listener, Fihi ma Fihi can feel surprisingly contemporary. It sounds less like a medieval scholar and more like a wise friend who keeps bringing you back to the basics. Where are you speaking from? From fear or from love? What are you really seeking? The approval of people or the gaze of the beloved? What are you refusing to accept, and how is that refusal making you ache? To engage with this text is to practice a certain kind of honesty. Not dramatic confession, not self-hatred, but simple, clear acknowledgement. This is where I am. This is what I feel. This is how attached I am to praise. This is how frightened I am to lose control. Rumi would say, start exactly there. That is what is in it. From there, something new can be born. Seen this way, Fihi ma Fihi is not just a record of past conversations. It is an ongoing conversation. Its real completion happens when someone now listens with the same seriousness as those early disciples. when we let his images sink into our own dilemmas, when we allow his quiet insistence on reality to soften our resistance to what life is asking of us. The fire of the Divan dazzles. The ocean of the Masnavi instructs. The prose of Fihi Fihi sits beside us. It speaks into our confusion. It does not promise to remove difficulty, but it does offer another way to meet it, with a little more trust, a little more clarity, and a growing willingness to say, not in despair but in remembrance, it is what it is, and even here, especially here, the beloved is at work. Part 12. The ethical framework, humility, service, and the cure for greed. From here, the question becomes very simple and very demanding. If all of this, the fire of love, the unity behind appearances, the polishing of the heart, is true, then how should a human being live? What does it look like, not in poetry, but in the market, at home, in the small frictions of each day? For Rumi, ethics is not a separate subject. It is love taking a visible form. It is the fragrance of a heart that has really begun to remember its source. Rules matter, but they are not the core. The core is a certain kind of person, humbled, generous, awake, and increasingly free from the hunger to grasp. Three qualities keep returning in his work: humility, service, and a clear seeing of greed as a spiritual illness. Together they form an inner architecture, not a cage, but a house in which the soul can live with more space and more light. Humility for Rumi begins with truthfulness, not with pretending to be small, but with recognizing how things really are. Who brought you into existence? Who keeps your heart beating while you sleep? Who arranged the endless web of causes that allow a single breath to enter your lungs? Measured against that, our sense of being self-made dissolves. This is why he speaks so often of nothingness. I am nothing, I am nothing, he repeats. He is not indulging in self-hatred. He is describing a shift in center. The ego, with its heavy capital, I, no longer claims to be the owner of life. It becomes a hollow reed. Through that hollowness, a different music can flow. Humility shows itself in how we see others. If every being is, in some way, a mirror for the beloved, then arrogance is a form of blindness. Looking down on someone is, in Rumi's language, turning your back on a face of God. He advises us to bow inwardly to everyone we meet, not to be submissive to their whims, but to acknowledge the spark they carry. This inner bow leads naturally to service. In his world, love that never leaves the realm of feelings is incomplete. Love wants to wash feet. Love wants to cook food. Love wants to sit by a sick bed. He uses the word khidmat, service, to name the daily acts by which we take responsibility for each other. Service does not mean grand gestures alone. It can be sweeping the floor of the meeting place, earning a lawful living for your family, greeting people with warmth, listening without rushing to judge. When done with the intention of pleasing God, these small acts become, in his view, a form of worship. In this way, the path to God passes straight through the lives of others. Rumi warns against a spirituality that tries to escape from humanity. He insists that you cannot truly love the Creator while despising the creation. To harm a heart is to harm a mirror of the real. To mend a heart is to honor the one who fashioned it. Standing against humility and service is a force he knows well, the ego, or Nafs. The Nafs is not just desire for food or comfort. It is that stubborn sense of, me first, the voice that constantly asks, what about my share? My image, my control. Greed is one of its clearest expressions. Greed for Rumi is not only about money. A poor person can be greedy for praise. A scholar can be greedy for recognition. Even a seeker can be greedy for spiritual experiences. Greed is any inner posture that tries to accumulate and secure rather than to receive and release. He compares this to a jug that keeps demanding more water when it is already full. Pouring more in does not increase its capacity, it only makes a mess. In the same way, when we try to stuff the infinite hunger of the soul with finite things, wealth, status, sensation, we overflow into confusion and harm. The real problem is not that we desire, but that we have forgotten what we truly desire. The cure, he suggests, is not to hate the world, but to loosen our grip on it. This is detachment. To live in the world, to work, to marry, to enjoy beauty, but without imagining that any of these are the final resting place of the heart. He is clear, breaking self-interest does not require fleeing society. It requires staying in society with a different relationship to what passes through your hands. Practically, this means generosity. When you have, you give. When you see a need, you respond. Not to gain a reputation for kindness, but to imitate the giver. The more you give, the more you discover that security does not come from what you store, but from the one who supplies. It also means tolerance. Rumi's tolerance is not indifference. It is a deliberate softening of the impulse to condemn. He urges us to cover others' faults, the way the night covers the earthy, quietly, without announcements. To listen with of tolerance, as he puts it, is to resist the nafs's pleasure in superiority. Compassion, too, is central. Be like the sun in mercy and compassion, he says. The sun shines on everyone, the loyal and the treacherous, the grateful and the oblivious. To grow in compassion is to move a little closer to that kind of impartial giving. Rumi does not deny how hard this is. He knows that suffering tests all these virtues. He does not romanticize pain, but he does see in it a strange opportunity. Hardship can make us bitter, more tightly curled around ourselves. Or it can crack us open. He prefers the second path. He speaks of suffering as a teacher that strengthens the wings of the bird. Without air resistance, there is no flight. In our own terms, without difficulty, there is no real chance to practice patience, trust, or compassion. It is in the face of injustice that justice becomes more than an idea. It is when we are wronged that forgiveness becomes an act of courage rather than a word. Knowledge in this framework is not neutral. To know more is to be more responsible. He distinguishes between knowledge that swells the ego and knowledge that softens it. Facts that do not lead to service have not yet become wisdom. True knowing bends the neck, not the other way around. All of this is held together by love. Love is not merely one virtue among others. It is the energy that makes humility possible, because you fall in love with something greater than yourself. It is the force that makes service a joy rather than a burden, because you see the beloved in those you serve. And it is the light that exposes greed, showing it as a panic born from forgetting that you are already held. In Rumi's ethical vision, the unity of being has very practical consequences. If every soul is, in some measure, a face of the one, then to hoard from another is, in a sense, to hoard from yourself. To wound another is to wound a part of the same living body. Kindness, then, is not only obedience, it is alignment with reality. So the framework he offers is not a tight cage of shoulds, it is more like a medicine. Humility treats the fever of self-importance. Service treats the loneliness that comes from living only for oneself. Detachment treats the anxiety that comes from trying to secure the future by clinging. To live this way is not to become perfect. It is to be continually willing to notice when the Nafs has taken the wheel again. To apologize, to return. At the center of this ethic is a quiet trust that what we release will not ultimately be lost, and what we keep at the expense of others will not truly belong to us. We are guests here, not owners. We are stewards, not masters. Our greatness does not lie in how high we stand, but in how deeply we bow. In the end, Rumi's teachings on humility, service, and greed are simply another way of saying what his poems have been saying all along. Let love rearrange your priorities. Let it reduce the noisy I to a small and useful servant. Let it turn your hands outward to give. Then ethics is no longer a dry list. It becomes the everyday choreography of a heart that is slowly remembering who it belongs to. Part 13. The Kernel and the Shell, Mysticism within the bounds of law. Between law and longing, Rumi refuses the easy choice of one against the other. He does not see them as rivals. He sees them as two hands of the same body, two wings of the same bird. In the language of the Sufis, there is the shell and there is the kernel. The shell is the outward form, the visible acts of worship, the spoken creed, the rules that shape a life. The kernel is the inner state intention, love, surrender, the secret conversation of the heart with God. Rumi's world is one where you cannot reach the kernel by despising the shell. You reach it by learning how to hold the shell properly, how to understand why it exists at all. The law for him is not a cage. It is a cup. Love is the wine. Without the cup, the wine spills. Without the wine, the cup is empty. So when Rumi speaks of mystical drunkenness, of being lost in the beloved, he is not throwing the cup to the ground. He is asking whether the cup is still serving its purpose. Has the form become a prison, or does it still carry the taste of the one for whom it was made? Rumi knew religious law from the inside. Before he became the poet of love, he was a jurist, a preacher, a man trusted to interpret the sacred rules for his community. He knew how law can protect the weak, organize devotion, and guard what is holy. He also knew how easily it can harden into mere habit, into a way of proving that we are right and others are wrong. For him, the law is like a lamp in the night. It gives shape and safety. It draws a circle of light in which you can walk without stumbling. But if you fall in love with the lamp and forget the light, something has gone wrong. If the rules become more precious than the one whose mercy they are meant to serve, the path has curved back on itself. He often returns to a simple distinction, the outer and the inner. The outer is necessary. Without it, we would drift. But the inner is why we came. Without it, we are spiritually starving. Prayer without presence. Fasting without tenderness. Recitation without listening. Rumi's mysticism, then, is not an escape from law. It is an attempt to relight the law from within. He asks, what is this act of prayer when it is full of love? What is this ritual when it is soaked in awareness? What is this command when it is heard as an invitation from the beloved, rather than a cold order from a distant authority? He loves to read the sacred words as doors, not walls. When the Creed says, in its simplest form, that there is no God but God, Rumi hears more than a statement about theology. He hears a movement of the heart. There is no real object of devotion but the one, no idol of ego, no false security, no passing pleasure can finally satisfy. Only that deeper love is worthy of our complete yes. This is what mystical interpretation means for him. Not making the text mean anything we like. Not dismissing the surface, but listening for the heartbeat behind the words. The text remains. The law remains. What changes is the depth at which we receive it. Of course, such an approach creates tension. Some fear that when love takes center stage, law will be quietly pushed aside. If the kernel is all that matters, why bother with the shell at all? Why fast? Why bow? Why follow any discipline, if God is found everywhere and in all things? Rumi's answer is direct. Ecstasy without ethics is not union. It is self-indulgence wearing a spiritual mask. For him, any state that pulls you away from humility, mercy, and responsibility is not from the beloved, no matter how intense it feels. He speaks of two modes on the path. There is intoxication and there is sobriety. There are moments where the seeker feels flooded, undone, shattered by nearness to God. A tear's trembling, sudden joy, a sense that the world has melted into light. These are the tastes of spiritual wine. But there must also be the return. After the dance, the marketplace. After the tearful night, the daily work of kindness. You come back from the ocean of presence to the shore of ordinary tasks, but you are not the same. Your heart is softer. Your speech is gentler. Your commitment to the law is now warmed from the inside. In that sense, the true test of mystical experience is not what you see in the moment. It is what you become afterward. Does your ecstasy leave you more patient with others, more honest in trade, more careful with the vulnerable around you? If not, Rumi would say you have mistaken smoke for fire. He gives image after image to make this clear. A tree heavy with fruit bends its branches low. The closer a servant draws to God, the lower they bow before creation. The more they taste of unity, the more seriously they take their duties within the visible world. Law in this light is not an arbitrary command from above. It is a training in love. The forms of worship, the patterns of daily conduct, are like repeated gestures of remembering. You stand, you bow, you give, you refrain, not to earn a place at God's table, but to stay awake to the fact that you are already sitting there. Rumi is painfully aware of how the shell can be abused. Religious rules can become tools of pride. Piety can become a costume. He tells stories of clerics puffed up by their own correctness, unable to recognize holiness when it appears in unexpected clothes. In those tales, it is often the broken one, the simple lover who sees more clearly. Yet he never sides with lawlessness. When the shell cracks, he wants it to crack, for the sake of the kernel, not out of boredom or rebellion. If a ritual is shaken, it is so that its meaning can come alive again. If a form is loosened, it is to make room for a more honest devotion, not to abandon devotion altogether. Think of a seed. The shell must break for the plant to grow. But if you destroy the shell before the life inside is ready, you kill the seed. Time, patience, and right conditions matter. Similarly, Rumi respects the slow ripening of the soul inside the structure of a life shaped by law. For us, this raises a subtle invitation. Many today stand at one of two extremes. Some cling hard to forms, afraid that if even one rule loosens, everything will collapse. Others, wounded by hypocrisy or narrowness, reject all structure as oppressive. Rumi offers a middle way that is not lukewarm compromise, but a reordering of priorities. Let the kernel guide how you hold the shell. Let love interpret law, not replace it. Ask of every practice, does this bring me closer to compassion, honesty, and remembrance? If so, hold it with gratitude. If not, seek to rediscover its meaning, or let it go if it has truly lost its soul. In Rumi's own path, the presence of shams shook his neatly ordered religious life. But Rumi did not become a man without prayer, without community, without responsibility. He became a man whose every act was suffused with yearning. His jurisprudence was not discarded, it was transfigured. The kernel and the shell, the wine and the cup, the secret and the rule. Rumi invites us to see that we do not need to choose one against the other. We are asked instead to ask again and again, where is the love in this? Where is the remembering? Where is the tenderness that shows this law still lives? In such questioning, law is no longer a ceiling above us. It becomes a floor beneath us. It supports, steadies, and gives direction, while the heart continues to grow upward toward the endless sky of the beloved. Part 14. The Religion of Love, Transcending Confessional Boundaries. Beyond names and borders, Rumi senses something older than any label we give ourselves. He calls it love. Not sentiment, not romance. A vast, underlying current that runs beneath every sincere search for the divine. Earlier we saw how he moves within his own religious tradition with deep loyalty and intimacy. Yet at the same time, his words keep slipping the fences we build. They reach out to Christians, to Jews, to people of other paths, and even to those who claim no path at all, as if they were written in the mother tongue of the human soul. Rumi looks at religious communities and sees different schools in the same city. Each has its textbooks, its teachers, its ways of prayer. Each claims to be nearest to the truth. But he is more interested in what all the students in all the schools are quietly longing for at night. To him, that longing is the real religion. He sometimes uses very bold language to express this. He imagines a faith that is not tied to one confession, a way of the heart that runs deeper than the names we give to our groups. Call it Islam, call it Christianity, call it something else entirely. The names are rivers. The source is one. This is not a cheap relativism for him, not the claim that all differences are meaningless. He knows that doctrine, ritual, and community shape lives in real and important ways. He is not ignorant of theological conflict. He lived in a world of debate and division. But when he listens more closely, he hears something beneath the arguments. Even in the harshest polemic, there is often a fear of losing connection with the real, a fear of being cut off from the source. Even in the most rigid voice, there may be a hidden tenderness for the sacred. Rumi wants to speak to that hidden place. He offers a simple image. Imagine the light of the sun streaming through windows of different colors. One pane is blue, another is red, another is green. On the floor you see patches of colored light. The blue spot insists, "I am the true light." The red claims the same. But the sun that shines through them is one. For Rumi, the prophets are like these windows. Each has a distinct hue, a particular teaching, a special path. Their stories are different, but the radiance they transmit is of a single origin. To love one truly is to recognize the light in all. In his poetry, he freely weaves the names and tales of many messengers. What matters to him is not which banner they marched under. It is how transparently they carried the flame of love and mercy. When he speaks of Moses, of Jesus, of Muhammad, he is less a partisan and more a lover describing different faces of the same beloved friend. From this vision grows his famous invitation, "Come whoever you are." He speaks of the wanderer, the worshipper, the broken one who has failed 1,000 times. No matter. Come. Begin again. The door, he suggests, is not guarded by a gatekeeper asking for your religious identity. It opens wherever a heart bows honestly in need. This does not mean Rumi abandons critique. He is sharp about the ways religion can harden into mere habit or into a tool for exclusion. He mocks those who use piety as a stick to beat others. He tells stories in which the formerly correct believer is outshone by the rough, flawed lover whose heart is on fire. Yet his answer to misused religion is not to destroy religion. It is to return to its living core. He imagines a field beyond the familiar oppositions. Beyond my group and your group, beyond right and wrong as weapons. Out there, he says, we can meet in another kind of clarity. What is that clarity? It is not the erasure of differences. It is the recognition that beneath all our practices lies the same set of questions. How do I live with a heart that is both fragile and hungry for meaning? What do I do with my guilt, my longing, my grief, my joy? How do I respond to the mystery that I did not create myself, yet I am here? The religion of love answers by turning these questions into a relationship. You are not alone in a cold universe. You are addressed, spoken to. Invited, every path that sincerely responds to that invitation, Rumi suggests, participates in the same great movement, even if its outer forms differ. This is why his work can sit comfortably in a mosque, in a church, in a meditation hall, or on the bedside table of someone who avoids all institutions. He keeps returning to experiences that all humans share: separation, desire, loss, or the need for forgiveness, the taste of beauty. Then he follows each of these threads back to the same center. For him, love is not just one virtue among others. It is the atmosphere in which all true virtues live. Courage without love becomes aggression. Discipline without love becomes cruelty. Faith without love becomes fanaticism. Love without these, on the other hand, becomes vague and weak. So he insists on a love that is both tender and precise, both universal and concrete. If love is the deepest religion, what, then, is the role of particular communities, scriptures, and rituals? Rumi would likely say they are languages love speaks. You learn to pray with the words and gestures of your tradition. You inherit stories that show you how love behaves. You are given a map. But you must remember that the map is not the destination. The story is not the one who speaks through it. The ritual is not the beloved, only a door into the beloved's presence. When this is clear, you can be deeply faithful to your own path while recognizing the glow in others. This has practical consequences. If the religion of love is real, then our first duty is not to defend our label, but to protect the capacity for love in ourselves and in others. How we speak to those we disagree with becomes more important than whether we win the argument. How we treat the stranger at our door becomes a more accurate measure of our religion than what we claim in debate. There is also a quiet courage in this stance. To let love transcend boundaries does not mean erasing your own commitments. It may mean holding them more gently, more humbly, and sometimes standing against members of your own group when they act in ways that betray the very love they profess. Rumi's voice asks us to imagine a humanity in which identities are real, but not ultimate. You can be rooted and open at the same time, grounded and spacious. You can kneel on your own prayer rug and still see the sacred in the one who bows differently or not at all. In a fractured world, this is not an abstract idea. It is a survival skill. When we reduce one another to labels, we make love smaller than it is. We forget that the same breath moves in all chests. We forget that pain feels the same in every language. The religion of love, as Rumi glimpses it, does not abolish difference. It sanctifies the space between us. It invites us to treat that space as holy ground, to step into it with respect, with listening, with the awareness that the one we seek may be hiding in the eyes of the person who stands opposite us. In the end, Rumi's words turn the mirror back to us. Beyond our affiliations, what do we really worship? Security, superiority, comfort, or the living, unpredictable, demanding reality of love itself? To follow the religion of love is to let that question unsettle us, soften us, and slowly reshape how we live. Not in theory, but in the daily, quiet ways we choose to see, to speak, and to care. Part 15. The Guest House, Psychological Acceptance and Inner Observation. Inside this simple image of a house with many visitors, Rumi sketches a whole way of living with ourselves. He calls this house our being human. And the visitors are our moods, our thoughts, our unexpected jolts of feeling. In one of his most loved poems, he invites us to imagine waking up each morning as the keeper of a guest house. You do not know who will knock at your door today. Joy may arrive, bright and expansive. Sadness may slip in, heavy and slow. A sudden anger, an old shame, a fear you thought you had outgrown. His instruction is disarmingly gentle. Welcome them all. Treat each visitor as an honored guest. even the dark, wildly unpleasant ones, because he says, each has been sent as a guide from beyond. This is not how most of us were taught to relate to our inner life. We divide our states into good and bad, acceptable and unacceptable. We cling to the pleasant and resist the painful. We congratulate ourselves on calm and blame ourselves for anxiety. We try to manage the mind like a strict landlord. Rumi asks us to try something humbler and braver. Instead of being the landlord, become the host. The host does not control who comes, but they can decide how to receive them. Will you slam the door in anger's face? Will you pretend fear is not at the window? Will you collapse in shame when regret steps in? Or will you open the door, bow slightly, and say, I see you. You are here. Come in. Sit down. Let me learn what you have to teach. This attitude is very close to what modern psychology calls acceptance and mindful awareness. But Rumi is not using technical language. He is speaking from the lived experience of watching the inner weather. He knows that when we fight our feelings, they often grow stronger. When we condemn them, they return in disguise. To welcome them does not mean liking them. It does not mean approving of every impulse. It means recognizing that they are already here. They have already crossed the threshold of consciousness. The only real question now is how will you relate to them? With war or with curious attention? He goes further. He suggests that even our deepest wounds can become doors. The mood that knocks you to the ground may be clearing you out for some new delight. The disappointment that empties you may be making space for a fresher, cleaner form of love. The humiliation that burns may be softening your pride. It is easy to quote such lines when times are calm, much harder when the house is full of grief. Rumi is not naive about this. His life was marked by loss and upheaval. The disappearance of Shams tore his heart. He knew nights of crying and confusion. So when he asks us to welcome the guests, he is not suggesting a passive, smiling endurance. He is pointing to a deeper stance. Underneath the specific emotion of the moment, can there be a broader trust that life, or God, or the beloved, is still somehow at work in us? Can we stand in the middle of the storm and say, I do not understand why this is happening, but I will stay present. I will not exile parts of my own experience. Inner observation, in Rumi's sense, has three movements. First, noticing. You become aware, anger is here. Sadness is here. The mind is tight. The body is restless. This simple naming already creates a little space. You are not completely fused with the state. Second, allowing. You stop fighting the fact that this is so. You let the sadness be sad. You let the fear feel like fear. You remove the added layer of self-judgment, I should not feel this. By releasing that layer, you reduce the suffering that comes from resistance. Third, listening. You ask, quietly, what is this guest here to show me? Perhaps anger is pointing to a boundary that has been crossed. Perhaps grief is revealing how deeply you have loved. Perhaps anxiety is reminding you of how fragile life feels, inviting you to a more compassionate way of being with yourself. In this process, you discover that you are not the guests, you are the house. Thoughts pass, feelings rise and fall. But something in you remains able to see, to watch, to welcome. Rumi would say that this spacious awareness is one of the mirrors in which the divine looks at itself. There is also an ethical dimension to this guest house practice. When you begin to treat your own difficult states with kindness, it becomes harder to condemn others for theirs. You recognize the same fear wearing different clothes, the same loneliness speaking a different language, the same longing acting out clumsily. From the outside, this may look like patience. From the inside, it is a knowledge born of observation. You have sat with your own storms. You know how little control you sometimes have over what arises, so you grow slower to judge and quicker to empathize. This does not mean you never set limits. A wise host does not let a guest burn down the house. Welcoming an emotion is not the same as obeying it. To say anger, "I see you," is not the same as anger, "Do whatever you want." Rumi's path always moves toward integration. You acknowledge what is present, learn from it, and then choose your response in the light of your deeper values. This is where his earlier teachings on love and law return. The inner observation feeds into outer action. You feel the surge of resentment, breathe with it, hear its story, and then act from a place that is aligned with love rather than with the raw impulse itself. In modern terms, we might call this emotional regulation. Rumi would probably call it adab of the heart, der, refined courtesy in the way we deal with our own inner guests. The guest house image also softens our relationship with change. We often cling to joy, afraid it will leave. We dread sorrow, afraid it will stay forever. Rumi reminds us that by nature guests come and go. No feeling is final. No state defines you completely. If you can sit in the doorway and watch them arrive and depart, something settles in you. You stop believing that today's mood is the whole truth about reality. You stop organizing your life around avoiding discomfort at all costs. You begin to trust that you have a larger capacity than you thought. This trust is not built in a day. It grows through hundreds of small acts of staying. You stay with a wave of shame without fleeing into distraction. You stay with a pang of envy without turning it into cruelty. You stay with boredom without numbing yourself. Each time, the house of your being learns that it can hold more. Rumi's guest house is, in the end, a training ground for presence. Presence with yourself. Presence with others. Presence with God. Because the same awareness that welcomes your own states is the awareness that can notice the subtle movements of grace in your life. If your inner door is always locked against pain, it is often locked against unexpected joy as well. So he invites us to a paradoxical tenderness, to care for ourselves not by constant self-improvement, but by hospitable seeing, to transform not by violent effort, but by allowing the light of attention to work slowly on the knots within. When the next difficult guest comes, a wave of anxiety, a memory, a sudden loneliness, you might remember his voice. You do not have to like this visitor. You do not have to agree with its stories. But you might try, even for a breath or two, to open the door. To say you are here. I will not turn away from my own experience. In that simple act, you stand in the same lineage as Rumi. You become a student of the inner world. You begin to discover that the house of your being is vaster than you feared and kinder than you imagined. And perhaps in one quiet corner of that house you may sense another guest who has been there all along, waiting. The one who sends all these visitors, not to harm you, but to lead you more deeply into yourself, and through yourself back to the beloved. Part 16. Interconnectedness, the tapestry of nature and the cosmos. High above a city, if you could rise past the roofs and the noise and keep rising, the streets would slowly lose their edges. Lights would become patterns. Rivers would become threads of silver. What seemed separate from the ground would begin to reveal its hidden design. Rumi invites us to do something similar with our attention, not by leaving the earth, but by looking again at what is already here. A tree, a stone, a dog in the street, the face of a stranger. For him, nothing stands alone. Everything is a thread in a single tapestry woven out of divine love. He lives inside a vision where the universe is not a pile of objects. It is a conversation. It is a living fabric that keeps whispering, over and over, one simple message: there is only one. In this view, the doctrine of unity is not an abstract claim. It is a way of seeing. The Sufis call it the unity of being. But Rumi rarely explains it like a philosopher. He paints it, he sings it. He lets it appear in stories and images that can slip past the mind and touch something quieter inside. Imagine a beam of sunlight entering a room. On the wall, it breaks into many patches, divided by door frames, chairs, people moving through. The light seems cut into pieces, but its source is one. It is always the same sun. Rumi returns to this kind of picture again and again. He says the world is like bunches of grapes, many orbs, many shapes. But when you crush them, when you taste the juice, the multiplicity is gone. There is only one sweetness. For him, each creature is a separate grape. Each moment, each person, each event, a distinct form. Yet beneath the skin of difference, there is a single life flowing through all of it. That life is Ishq, divine love. This is why Rumi does not speak of nature as a background or a neutral setting. Nature is not a stage on which the spiritual drama plays out. Nature is the drama. The wind, the dust, the birds, the rain, all of them are letters in the same sacred text. He looks at a field of wheat and sees not only food, but worship. Every stalk is stretching upward. Every stalk is a prayer. He listens to thunder and hears not just weather, but a drumbeat calling hearts back to remembrance. In one image, he says that the entire universe is like a reed flute in the hands of the divine. Each thing is a hollow channel. Each thing, when emptied, can be played. The music is one, but the notes are many. This sense of interconnectedness is not sentimental. It is demanding. If all things are joined, then how I relate to the smallest of them reveals how I relate to the one who sustains them all. Cruelty to an animal, contempt for a stranger, indifference to a tree, these are not minor flaws in character. They are forms of forgetfulness. They are ways of turning away from the cosmic kinship Rumi keeps pointing to. He looks at a human being and does not see an isolated mind locked inside a body. He sees a map of the world. The same forces that shape the sky, the same patterns that move the oceans, echo quietly inside the soul. Look within, he suggests, and you will see the stars. From this perspective, our inner storms are not separate from outer ones. The fear that passes through a heart, the joy that suddenly rises, the grief that will not move. They are all part of the same weather. And just as no single wave owns the sea, no single emotion is the whole of who we are. When Rumi says that everything is one, he does not mean that differences are meaningless. He knows a rose is not a stone. A friend is not an enemy. He is not blind to harm, injustice, or pain. Rather, he is suggesting that, beneath the friction of our lives, there is a deeper current that holds, even our conflicts, in a larger embrace. Think of a woven carpet. From the back, the threads cross and tangle, colours clash. Nothing looks deliberate. From the front, a pattern appears. Not every part is soft. Some colours are sharp, some shapes disturb, but each thread has its place. Rumi often speaks as if we are living on the back of the carpet. We see fragments. We feel pulled and snagged by stray strands. The unity of the design is hidden from us, yet he insists that a pattern is there. This does not erase responsibility. It does not say that everything we do is automatically sacred. Instead, it offers a way to move through life without collapsing into despair. Even our mistakes, when we turn through them, can become material for the tapestry. Even our sorrows can be rewoven into praise. In Rumi's world, animals, plants, and stars are not mute. They remember the one who breathed them into being. Humans, in a strange twist, are the forgetful ones. We are the ones who need to be reminded by a bird's song or a mountain's silence of what has never stopped being true. So he urges us to learn from the rest of creation. Look at the sun, he says. It pours out light without asking for a reward. Look at the river. It keeps flowing even when no one watches. Look at the tree. It holds its fruit out to both the kind and the cruel. These are not just pretty lessons. They are clues about our own nature if we were less tangled in fear. Deep down he believes the soul wants to be like that, open-handed, radiant, unafraid of giving itself away. Rumi's interconnected universe is not just physical, it is moral and spiritual. We do not simply share space, we share consequence. A hidden act of generosity improves more than a mood. It subtly alters the field around us. Likewise, hidden bitterness thickens the air. This is why he speaks so often of polishing the heart. A polished heart reflects more light. And that light does not stop at the edge of our skin. It spills into our families, our cities, our histories. The opposite is also true. When a person refuses to soften, when greed becomes a habit, the damage is never private. The ripples spread. The tapestry tightens in that place. Breathing becomes harder for everyone nearby. Rumi does not ask us to be perfect. He asks us to be aware, to notice that we are not islands, to see that each thought, each word, each small act is a stitch in a fabric much larger than our individual story. This vision stretches beyond the earth. He looks at the sky and does not see cold emptiness. He sees a community of wandering lights. He imagines the planets and stars as fellow travellers, each turning in remembrance, each circling in its own language around the same hidden centre. For him, the cosmos is a whirling dance. It mirrors the summer of the dervishes. The galaxies spin as the seekers spin. The dance floor is vast, but the music is one. Here the theme of longing returns. Rumi imagines that every part of the universe is homesick. He hears the ache not only in human hearts, but in stones wanting to be lifted, in seeds trying to break open, in clouds heavy with unshed rain. This longing is not a defect. It is the engine that draws creation onward. To live in awareness of this is to move through the world differently, to walk down a street and feel that nothing you pass is truly other, even what you don't understand, even what you fear. He does not mean that all differences vanish into a grey blur. Rather, the sharpness of difference becomes a kind of beauty, like colours on that woven carpet. The red needs the blue to be seen. The shadow needs the light to give it form. In our time, we often feel cut off from nature, from each other, from ourselves. We live behind screens, in sealed rooms, under artificial light. It can seem as if the web Rumi describes has been torn, as if we have fallen out of the story. His answer is gentle and a little surprising. You cannot fall out of the story, he would say, because you are the story. You are a line in the poem of the universe. Even your sense of separation is woven into it. What changes is not the fact of interconnectedness, but our willingness to wake up to it, to pause, to listen, to allow the world around us to become transparent again. Transparent not in the sense of vanishing, but in the sense of revealing the light it carries. Sometimes this awakening begins in very small ways. You sit under a tree and feel, for a moment, supported by something larger than your own effort. You look at the night sky and sense not your smallness in a hostile vastness, but your belonging in a wider life. You hold someone's gaze a little longer and notice that behind their roles, and your roles, there is a quiet recognition. For Rumi, these moments are not accidents. They are invitations, tiny openings in the weave through which we can glimpse the one who holds all threads. The more we honour such moments, the more a different kind of perception begins to grow. We start to feel our thoughts as clouds passing through a shared sky, our breath as part of a wider breathing, our private heartbreak as one wave among countless waves on the same sea. This is not meant to dissolve our individuality into nothing. Rumi loves particular faces, particular stories. But he holds them lightly, the way you might hold a candle in a dark room. The candle matters. Yet what matters even more is the light it gives. So when he speaks of the tapestry of nature and the cosmos, he is also speaking of you. You are a thread in that cloth. You are a grape on the vine, a note in the flute, a swirl in the dance. Your choices matter, not because you stand outside the whole, but because you are inside it. And perhaps, as we move further with him, this insight becomes less of an idea and more of a comfort. We are not as alone as we think. We are carried in a pattern we cannot yet fully see. We are participants in a love that stretches from the smallest grain of dust to the furthest star. In that awareness, even the simplest act, a sip of water, a quiet breath, a single kind word, can become a way of touching the entire tapestry at once. Near evening in Konya, on a winter day in 1273, the streets began to fill. Merchants left their stalls. Students stepped away from their books. Mothers hushed their children and moved toward a single point in the city. Word had spread that Rumi was close to leaving this world. For many, this would have been an occasion of dread. the passing of a teacher, a leader, a beloved friend. But in Rumi's own language, this was not the night of an ending. It was his wedding night, his meeting with the beloved he had been singing of all his life. To call death a wedding is shocking at first. Our bodies resist it. We know the taste of loss. We have seen how grief empties a room. We have watched hands grow cold. Rumi does not deny this. He knows the human side of death intimately. He lost friends, students, family. Most of all, he lost Shams of Tabriz, the companion who had set his inner world on fire. He wrote poems that sound like a howl from the depths of absence. And yet, somewhere underneath the anguish, another tone appears. He begins to see death, not as a final separation, but as the completion of a long courtship. The soul, which has always belonged to God, finally drops its last veil. He once described life in this world as a kind of exile. Like the reed cut from its bed, we sing because we are not quite home. Our joys are real, but they are partial. Our loves are deep, but they are tinged with fragility. Nothing here lasts. Everything we hold will, at some point, slip from our fingers. Instead of running from this, Rumi leans toward it. If everything changes, he reasons, perhaps change itself is a sign. Perhaps it is pointing beyond what fades. Perhaps the ache we feel when something ends is not only pain, but a reminder that our true belonging is elsewhere. So he calls death a passage, a door between rooms. On one side of the door we see leaving. On the other side there is arrival. This is where his image of the wedding enters. A wedding at its heart is a union. Two lives, once separate, are joined. They do not stop being themselves, but their stories can no longer be told apart. For Rumi, the soul's relationship with God is similar. In this world, the soul can taste that union in flashes, in prayer, in love, in deep stillness, in sudden beauty. But it is always, in some sense, interrupted. The body tires, the mind wanders, the phone rings, the child cries. Death in his vision is the removal of those interruptions. It is not terror, but intimacy without distraction. The lover and the beloved finally face to face. No more veils, no more delays. This is why he can write, without irony, our death is our wedding with eternity. To many ears, that sounds like poetry only, but for him, it is also a description of reality. This does not mean that every form of dying is sweet. He lived in a time of war, plague, and famine. He must have seen deaths that were brutal and sudden. His vision is not about the body's vulnerability. Rather, it points to a level of existence deeper than the body, a part of us that is not destroyed by how we leave or when we leave, a part that is simply called back. Underneath this trust lies his understanding of the self. He speaks of the carnal soul, the part of us attached to status, to control, to fear. This part is always scanning for threat, always trying to secure itself. For this small self, death is the ultimate defeat, an insult it cannot endure. But Rumi's path of Fana and Baqa has been training the heart for another kind of response. In Fana, the habits of that small self begin to burn away. Pride, greed, the need to be right, slowly loosen their grip. In Baqa, what remains is a self rooted in God, a self that lives as a mirror of something larger. To such a self, death is no longer an enemy. It is the final step in a process that has already begun. The physical body falls away, as other layers of identity have already fallen. What is left is what was real from the start. Rumi sometimes speaks of this as the difference between the grape and the juice. The grape's skin is fragile, it tears, it bruises, it spoils. But the juice, once freed, can be shared, poured, turned into wine. Our bodies, our roles, our public names, these are like the grape's skin, needed for a while, honoured while they are given to us, yet not the final truth. Death is the moment the press closes, the skin is left behind, the essence flows on. The day Rumi died, the city did not divide into camps. Muslims, Christians, and Jews all walked in his funeral procession. Different scriptures, different rituals converging around one body. This too is an image of his teaching about death. Underneath religious labels, he believed, the human journey is one. We are all on our way from God to God, whether we use those words or not. His followers began to call the anniversary of his death his wedding night, and that name has endured for centuries. Each year, people gather in Konya on that date. They remember his passing not as a failure of medicine or a tragic accident of fate, but as the consummation of a life that had already emptied itself out in love. If we listen closely, there is something both comforting and unsettling in this. Comforting because it suggests that death is not chaos. It is a scheduled meeting. Unsettling because it asks us to look at our own life and ask, what exactly am I preparing to meet? If death is a wedding, then life is the engagement period. It is the time when the lover gets ready. One does not walk into such a meeting distracted and half asleep. One prepares. One cleans the house of the heart. One learns slowly to prefer the beloved over every lesser attachment. Rumi knows we often do the opposite. We cling to what will leave us. We build our identity out of what is destined to crumble. We act as though death will never arrive. So he uses death not to frighten, but to clarify. When you remember that you will die, he suggests, what matters begins to change. The grudges lose some of their flavour. The rivalry you are nursing grows thin. Small pleasures become more piercingly beautiful, and the possibility of living from the heart, rather than from habit, feels more urgent and more tender. His teachings on death are also teachings on how to live. He does not counsel withdrawal. Until the wedding night, he says, dance, teach, love, serve, write your Masnavi, hold your children, laugh with your friends. Engage fully, but hold everything as a trust, not a possession. If you know you will one day return the keys, you drive more carefully. You enjoy the ride, but you do not confuse the car for your home. Rumi's own final years reflect this balance. He did not retreat into a cave to wait for death. He dictated thousands of verses. He led gatherings of Sama. He guided students. His life remained a flowing river up to the last bend. To him, the best preparation for a peaceful death was a life spent dissolving the boundaries between oneself and the divine. By the time the body failed, the essential union was already underway. Death simply completed what love had begun. Of course, hearing this does not erase our fear. We carry images of hospitals, of sudden accidents, of long goodbyes. We might believe in God or in some form of continuity, and still tremble. Rumi would not scold us for this. He would likely say, bring that fear into the conversation with the beloved. Do not hide it, let it speak, let it cry, then listen. He might remind us that every night in sleep we enact a tiny rehearsal. We let go of the day, of our plans, of our vigilance. For hours we remain utterly defenseless, yet each morning we wake. Each morning something returns us. If we can trust that little death, perhaps, over time, we can begin to trust the larger one. He uses another simple image. When a chick is in the egg, the shell is its whole world. It cannot imagine life beyond that curve. If you told it, soon this shell will break apart, the chick might panic. From its view, that is catastrophe. But from a wider view, the breaking is birth. Our bodies, our familiar patterns, are like shells. They shelter us for a time. Then there comes a moment when they can no longer hold the life inside. The breaking feels like ending. Rumi suggests it may also be a beginning. This does not make grief unnecessary. When someone we love dies, the body misses the body. The voice, the smell, the small habits, these are not illusions. Our tears honour them. Rumi cried for his losses. He did not float above his pain, but he let grief push him toward a deeper layer of trust. The layer on which he could say, with a strange, luminous certainty, the friend is not gone. The form has changed. The connection has moved to a subtler field. In that field, separation weakens. In that field, the wedding is already planned. To hear death spoken of this way may not resolve all our questions, but it can soften a rigid fear. It can open a small window in a dark room. We may still recoil from the idea of our own ending. We may still cling. Yet somewhere, perhaps, a different possibility begins to whisper. What if the last door we walk through is not an exit into nothing, but an entrance into the embrace we have been seeking all along? Rumi does not offer this as a dogma to be argued over. He offers it as a lens, a way of holding our mortality that returns us, again, to love. If we are, as he says, already involved in a great love story, then death is not the cancellation of that story. It is its deepest chapter, the one in which all the scattered hints of union finally come into focus. Until then, we live, we stumble, we learn. We taste separation and connection. We sit at the bedside of those who leave before us. We practice letting go in small ways, so that, when the wedding invitation finally arrives, we may recognize it. And when that night comes, for Rumi, for us, for everyone we love, perhaps we can remember his words. Not to erase our sorrow, but to cradle it. To say, quietly, through our tears a door has opened. A meeting long prepared for has begun.